All right, we're going live. As my son walks in here handing me a Coke and everything else. Chessboard, what's up, my brother? Gabber, what's up, brother man? So, give it a minute, see who all shows up. Sorry guys, I was gonna start at 6 or at 5. I'm sorry. I didn't see John, and then I don't get alerts for him anymore. So I was gonna roll it out at 5. Then I saw they were going live, so I decided, screw it. I'll delay it for a little while so I can hang out with him. They had X Tech on, which is freaking just really an awesome company. I don't have some of their stuff. Seen quite a bit of it, but seems to be an awesome company. And it's had some stuff in the past. I didn't Lightning, what's up, brother? I didn't realize X Tech was the one, because I asked in the chat. I didn't realize X Tech was the one that had to destroy hundreds of AK mags due to some patent crap going on. So brother from let me shut something else down. So brother from X Tech decided, screw it. If we got to destroy these mags, we're going to do it right. And they set the mags up with, I don't know, a couple 100 pounds of tannerite and basically launched them to the moon, which was really cool and broke my heart at the same time, because you guys know me in AKs. Toy Town, what's up, my brother? How you and the kiddos doing? So I'll give it another minute, and then we'll get into this. We are going to get to the oral. Yeah, more fun. It's out of Minnesota. It's about unserialized firearms. You know, all of us feel about the same way about unserialized firearms. Hell, I carry one every day for my everyday carry, and government shouldn't have any say-so with it. But I'm thinking in this case, I was reading some stuff about it today. He was charged with having an unserialized firearm. He was charged with not having a permit for the firearm in Minnesota. The lower court, or the district court, basically sided with him on the arguments about the search for the gun, and sided with him that the gun didn't need to be serialized. He's getting prosecuted by Attorney Keith, or District Attorney General, whatever you want to call him, Keith Ellison, who, if you don't know who Keith Ellison is, he's a giant turd. So they're pushing it up through the courts. And I was able to listen to some of this today. It's kind of cool listening to it. Sharing the pain. Ooh, yeah, Tori, I could see that eating some time for sure. That's not just a little bit of money someone loses in a couch. You start seeing mistakes like that. Yeah, there's some answers that need to be had. So I'll show you guys, and it's one of the reasons I was going to shoot another video and just decided to do this all in one, because this was a ghost gun case. Yeah, Warsaw, I didn't get to watch that yet, brother. I've been up to it lately. Just busy, and then of course you know yourself, Warsaw. You get home from doing stuff, and then tired, and then take the kiddos, wife, add everything else on top of that. It eats some time up. Hopefully my wife don't kill me today because I'm streaming. I did pick up the stuff for dinner, though. I was a good boy. But hell, let me show you guys some of the goodies. Ow! Stabbed myself. So, we have a barrel. La da da da. 18-inch, fluted for her pleasure. 7.62 NATO. Some of you guys that have heard me talking already know where this is going. And of course, they're going to go back down there like that. Screw it. Just sit down there. We have a receiver flat. Some of you guys would know what this is already. This is a Set Me C. So this is going to be my first Set Me build. And we have the actual parts kit. So I haven't even broken everything down yet. So this is going to be the next build I'll be working on. So a Set Me C. So I've got everything. Crap kind of set to the side. Basically all the parts together. Yeah, like a G3 clone. So I've got all the parts together, trying to get my printer worked out so I can print the bending jig, unless someone wanted to like donate one to the cause. And then there's a welding jig I've got to print a bunch of parts for. Oh, dude, I already want an FN. I already want an FL. I mean, already. Yeah, that's already something I seriously want. So that's been on the list of guns that I want for a very long time. So I don't doubt that at all. It's already there. So that's the build. So I got the parts kit, got the barrel, got the receiver flat. I have to get the jig together to actually bend the flat into the receiver itself. Still doing some research on it because I've never built a Set Me before. So this is going to be a completely new build for me. And what I'm thinking is when I get everything in line, get the tooling and stuff like that done, is maybe doing some Rumble streams building it. Bart, what's up, my brother? Hell yeah, Barton, good deal, brother. And what they're paying big truck and diesel mechanics these days, you ought to be making some cheese, for sure. I got a thing today, or one of the, what was that? Oh, I know what it is. Never mind. It's not important. I'm probably, which I'm not planning on doing anything with it, but I'm going to be kind of a class filler. The state of Alabama is hurting so bad, and of course, all across the nation is hurting so bad for CDL drivers that the college is actually offering a free class to get your CDL. So I'm gonna probably be doing that in the next little while, as long as they can get enough people in it, and they allow instructors. So screw it. Yeah, I'm gonna try to do that. Yeah, dude, if you're starting at 32, brother, no, that ain't bad. Shit, no. And of course, I mean, depending on where you're at, I know some guys that started out as fleet mechanics and shit like that and ended up really high up in some companies and were making serious money. So hell yeah, man. Good deal. All right. Local places pay 46. But are they smaller companies with less benefits? Do they require, I don't know, sometimes just the front side money isn't the best way to go. But certainly, man, especially after you build the resume and get up there a little bit, yeah, you should be able to demand that kind of money easy. Yeah, Chess, but I don't want to go for no. I don't know. I don't want to go for a driving job like that. My back would hate that more than what I do now, actually. Yeah, Barton. I mean, it's just that's resume building, skill building. So You may start out at 30 something, a couple years into it, build that money up. So, yeah, lightning, dude. My dad and a couple other guys I know have driven over the road. And yeah, dude, it freaking blows. Um, it's not something I want to do. I would love the driving. Don't get me wrong. I would love the driving. But when your lower back is as shot out as mine, yeah, it don't love you. Uh, much less never being home with, especially with kiddos and wife. Tactical Fud, what is up, my brother? All right, so Blue Curtain, what is up, brother, man? All right, so we introduced the Set Me build. For those of you guys just coming in, I've got the parts kit for the Set Me, receiver for the Set Me, barrel for the Set Me. And thanks to Night Strike, man. Night Strike, I guess he was cruising around looking at prices on the kits because I've been telling him a little while I want to build one. And right at the end of last week, they had a sale on them. The parts kits themselves were like $99. So I couldn't pass that up. Hell, the barrel costs more than the parts kit and the receiver. Because the barrel was almost 200. The receiver was like 80 something. So yeah, it's the prices weren't bad. Now I gotta get off my ass. I'm trying to get my printer up and running. So I can actually print the jigs out and everything for it. But yeah, this is going to be an interesting. Like I said, I will probably, once I get everything together, is just sit around and do a couple Rumble streams building this thing is what I'd like to do with it. Yeah, decent condition from what I can see, Warsaw. I haven't broke it all the way down yet. The furniture's a little rough. This wasn't one of the like premium kits, but I don't really care about that. And especially for the first build, this is kind of like the first AK I built. I got it a lot less expensive kit and just started working with it. And then, of course, built all my own tools for that. And once I learned how to do it, then I invested in some good AK builder tools and tall tools and stuff like that to be able to build them a lot cleaner, a lot neater. That's how I end up with a few of my babies that are laying around in here. So anyway, I might play with that on the next build, Barton. This one, especially learning and it being a new build, I want to build it, Set Me from the ground up. Damn, Chess. I mean, they're desperate for drivers everywhere right now. A lot of what it is, things got so crazy for a little while. A lot of people quit driving. If you pay attention when you go to stores right now, or you look at what's sitting on the shelf versus what was sitting on the shelf before 2020, there's a huge difference in between those. So let's see. Let me pull up the oral arguments here, and we're going to listen to these. Well, I'll show you two things real fast. Screen share. I think this is it. Yeah, this is it. So I didn't see this until I fell asleep a little early last night after I got done listening to Dark and everybody. And then woke up about 2 something. Couldn't go back to sleep. And this popped up in my feed about these oral arguments. So luckily enough, their Michigan Supreme Court actually has a pretty good video file for their Supreme Court oral arguments. So I was able to find these. And the arguments made by the state in this are about the same as you would expect, which means they are always absolutely mind-blowingly stupid. and I just kind of got to skim through them earlier. Let me shut down some stuff. I want to try to make sure it's as smooth as possible. And then we'll crank this up.
We have 2 cases on our oral argument calendar this morning. The first case is Logan Hunter Vagle versus State of Minnesota. Just a couple of housekeeping matters. Justice Hennessy is unable to be with us today, but she will be participating in both cases.
Joe Biden talking about this stuff is absolutely
insane. With respect to this first case, just a reminder to counsel that you'll each have 3 minutes of uninterrupted time to make any opening statements that you'd care to make to the court. At the end of those 3 minutes, I will stop you if you haven't stopped yourselves, and to see if the court has any questions. Mr. Erickson, it looks like you've reserved 10 minutes for rebuttal. Is that correct? Okay, you may begin whenever you're prepared to do so.
Now, just hold on. Let me do this. Let me throw out some groundwork. So, I think part of this was done in 2020, then some of it was done in 2023, and Minnesota changed their laws to make it completely illegal to have a firearm without a serial number. And I mean, completely illegal. So even we'll hear it in here, even if you had a gun that was pre-1968, before the federal government required a serial number on a firearm, you had great granddaddy shotgun or rifle or something like that, even guns that weren't required to have serial numbers until much later, like 22s and shotguns, you would be a felon. It actually comes down to, if you ordered all the parts and you had the parts in your possession to build a Polymer 80 or, AR or something like that, you had all the parts in your possession, or at least the majority of the parts in your possession, you're a felon under their so-called law, which I find absolutely fucking insane, especially consider they talk about, well, you can get a serial number, but to get a serial number, I have to have the parts. And if I have the parts, you're telling me I'm already a felon. Go figure. Hey, Arg, what's up, my brother? What's going on, Elliot? So again, this is Minnesota. You guys let me know if this video is running clean or not.
Good morning. Excuse me. Good morning, and may it please the court. My name is Anders Erickson, and I represent Mr. Vagle this morning. There is no doubt that gun violence is a serious problem in Minnesota, and the Minnesota legislature should continue to do whatever it can to address the policy questions surrounding gun violence through the legislative process. But the question before this court this morning is not a policy question about how to best curb gun violence. Instead, what this court must decide is what the legislature intended 30 years ago when it wrote the removal or alteration of a serial number statute. Did the legislature intend to create an outright ban on thousands of firearms, including privately made firearms and firearms manufactured prior to 1968? Did the legislature intend to expose law-abiding Minnesotans in possession of these firearms to felony charges and the resulting consequences, without providing any explanation for how to comply with the law or any grace period to comply with the law following the enactment? The simple answer to these questions is no. This is not what the legislature intended. Instead, the plain language of the statute, read in its proper context, clearly effectuates the known intent of the legislature, which was to create a state crime that mirrors the federal law prohibiting the removal or alteration of serial numbers. Importantly, it is telling that nowhere in the county attorney's brief or in the attorney general's amicus brief is there a single argument that this was not the legislature's intent when enacting the statute. Nonetheless, the state now argues that 30 years later, 30 years after the legislature wrote this statute, the legislature's use of a single quotation mark changes the entire purpose of the statute, bans thousands of firearms, and makes otherwise law-abiding Minnesotans felons. This plain language argument must be rejected. Alternatively, if the state's interpretation is deemed reasonable and the statute is therefore ambiguous, the canons of statutory interpretation and the legislative history, which the state has not argued against, leave no doubt regarding what the legislature intended in 1994. And when choosing between these two interpretations to resolve the ambiguity, our interpretation allows for a clear application of the law, alleviates constitutional vagueness problems, and avoids serious Second Amendment concerns that would surely result from an outright ban on certain firearms. In sum, this court should reject the state's interpretation of the statute because it is unreasonable, unworkable, conflicts with the plain language of the statute and the legislature's intent, creates serious constitutional concerns, and as it has done in this case, creates absurd and damaging consequences for otherwise law-abiding Minnesotans. I'm happy to entertain the court's questions.
Counsel, I just want
Oh,
to
dude,
clarify,
that is
you're not
too late,
making
Martin.
any constitutional claim under the Second Amendment, correct?
Not a separate Second Amendment claim, but this court does need to consider the fact that it should not interpret a statute in a way that could result in a
My
Second
daughter
Amendment
would love
violation
that.
or conflicts with a constitutional amendment like the Second Amendment.
You never raised that argument at the trial court.
I was not the trial attorney, but no, that was not raised before the trial court, no.
Counsel, you jump immediately to what the legislature's intent, what you believe the legislature's intent was. But of course, we only get there if we find that the statute's language is ambiguous. And I actually, frankly, I think, you know, you have a meritorious argument, certainly, that if you were to look at what the legislature did, you know, it sort of mirrors the statute. But as you well know, like as I say, we don't get there unless we say the statute is
I wish
ambiguous.
that Hunter Biden
I'm
trial
still
was
trying
being
to figure out
televised.
what is ambiguous about subpart 3, which makes it a crime to receive or possess a firearm that is not identified by a serial number. I don't know what's ambiguous about that. So you help me with that.
Yeah, absolutely, Your Honor. And I think the really important thing in this case is to read that provision in its proper context with the entire statute. Just reading that alone, if that was by itself, just subpart 3, there might be other vagueness issues and whatnot, but that alone would, you know, that's pretty clear. But we have this federal provision which does all the work in the statute. And that federal provision within those quotation marks says serial number or other identification information that clearly connects that to all 3 subparts. When the legislature enacted the statute, I agree that wasn't the most artfully way of doing it, but if they wanted to connect all terms that are independent from each other because the legislature used or, there's no connection between them. So just because there's quotation marks around them doesn't mean that that only applies to subparts 1 and 2.
So, counsel, on that note, because the phrase is in quotation marks and it's not in subpart 3, if we agree with you, does that mess up, for lack of a better word, our other statutory interpretation tools?
No, Your Honor. Like I said, I think the statute is unique in how it was written, but I think this court can state that because both those terms are within the quotation marks, that therefore it applies to both phrases, serial number or other identification information. And that same provision states the section, right? So it's not just subparts 1, it's not just subpart 2. And the second thing we have to look at is when reading this in its entire context, subpart 3 doesn't make any sense without the federal law. There would be 2 different regulatory schemes between subparts A, B, and C. There would be the federal law applying for the first 2 and a law that I'm not sure what it would be. We don't know what the definition of serial number is. We don't know who could have put the serial number on the firearms. There's no sort of recording mechanism, and that's the whole point of serial numbers, is once a serial number is placed on a firearm, it needs to be recorded. So then if that firearm is found after a crime or is stolen, we know where that came from. But if we just have that on its own with no other regulatory scheme or no other statute describing anything about serial numbers in Minnesota, what are we going to do with that serial number? It's just going to be a number.
Counsel, I took a look at the criminal jury instruction that's proposed for this crime, 22.20, and it's interesting that in each of the three subparts, the reporter has the following statement: a quote serial number or quote other identification quote means the serial number or other information required under federal law for the identification of firearms. Now, obviously, that's a reporter's assessment of what the law means, but that seems to be consistent with your argument that the words serial number apply to the federal law definition applies to each of these three subdivisions. Is that kind of what you're arguing, that we can't take that word out of that context of the entire phrase?
Sorry, if we could go back. So you're saying the jury instruction guide said that federal law applied to all three subparts?
It appears to say that. It says
Yeah.
required under federal law for the identification of firearms, and it doesn't have the phrase, the entire phrase in quotes.
That's right.
It isolates serial number, quote unquote, and other identification, quote unquote. Now, I realize as far as statutory interpretation tools, the crim jigs aren't going to, we have to get the law right, but I thought it was interesting that the district courts around the state are being told that that's the meaning of this provision.
That's right. And I think that also plays out in the history of the charging and how few charges were under subpart 3 prior to like the last 2 or 3 years, and that nobody believed that firearms manufactured before 1968 without serial numbers were a crime, right? That there were no prosecutions in Minnesota for someone who possessed a .22 caliber rifle or other long guns that were manufactured before 1968 without a serial number. And if this court adopts the state's interpretation, every single one of those would be a felony. And in 1994, I assume it would have been a pretty big deal if the legislature passed a law saying that every one of those firearms creates a felony and would create then an outright ban on those firearms with no ability of those individuals to know how to comply with the law. Where were they supposed to go to get a serial number? Could they just write any number on their firearm manufactured before 1968? There was no explanation at all as what individuals were supposed to do.
So under your analysis and incorporating the federal law in subpart 3, what is your answer to the question that you just posed? What in 1994, if you had a long gun that didn't have a serial number, what was the procedure under federal law?
There was no federal serial number requirement for a firearm before 1968 that didn't have a serial number.
So you would interpret it to mean subpart 3 would mean you don't need a serial number, even though the law says you do need a serial number.
No, I read it as the federal law articulates it, where you only need a serial number if it's required. So the federal law says you only need a serial number if it's required by this chapter. The way the Minnesota legislature wrote that was instead of having it after every subpart, which wouldn't have made sense because it couldn't say under this chapter, it had to say under federal law. It did it at the end. So under federal law, no one was required to put a serial number on a firearm manufactured before 1968 under federal law in 1994. So the Minnesota legislature passes that law, it comes into play, it clearly states that federal law applies, so nobody goes out and turns over their firearms to law enforcement. In fact, law enforcement is still selling these in auctions all across the state of Minnesota because even without serial numbers.
But you've got to agree it would be a pretty unusual way for the legislature to proceed to write a law that says it is illegal to possess a firearm without a serial number, period, and then incorporate by reference federal law that says you don't need a serial number on certain firearms. I mean, I think that's your argument, and I understand why it is your argument, but like, what's your argument then for why the legislature would have proceeded in that way?
Because it was attempting to adopt the federal law that prohibited removing serial numbers from firearms. So it incorporated federal law by referencing it, and then once somebody would look at the Minnesota statute, then they'd look to federal law and say, is this firearm required to have a serial number? Because if it wasn't required to have a serial number and someone put one on it, scratched off, that's not a crime either.
But but then that theory is you're adding a lot of words to that subpart 3. Subpart 3 doesn't say it's illegal to possess a firearm without that is required to have a serial number. It just says it's illegal to possess a firearm that doesn't have a serial number, right?
So I'm not adding any words to the statute. The federal requirement in 609.667 refers to what is required by federal law. It is not let's look to the definitions in federal law.
So it's a serial number that has to, if a gun has to have a serial number under federal law, then it has to have a serial number for purposes of this statute.
That's right. And then also within subparts 1 and 2, only firearms that are required to have serial numbers, it's a crime to scratch them off.
So, and I read through that Fed reg that you cited.
It's a fun read, huh?
Well, I skimmed through it, but I found the places that you were pointing to. But what I didn't understand exactly is what's the statutory argument under federal law that it's limited, that it doesn't go back before 1968? Is there a piece of federal statute that actually, I mean, I get that that's how it's been interpreted, at least by the AT or whoever did this regulation. But what is it in federal law that says it's only goes back to 19? Is it because it's manufacturers? It's limited to firearms that were produced, I guess, by manufacturer, and you can't say that they had to do it before it was a law?
Yeah, let me see if I can try to clarify, and then I can respond to any questions. So in 1934, Congress passed the National Firearms Act, and it required serial numbers on a handful of types of firearms, like machine guns and other very specific crimes. Did not require serial numbers on .22 caliber rifles or shotguns. Then in 1968, the Gun Control Act was enacted, where it required serial numbers on every firearm, including the .22 caliber and shotguns. But it grandfathered in this idea that any firearm manufactured before 1968 that was not required to have a serial number, we're not requiring you to add one. So there's this.
And is there language in the statute that says that, or is that just how it's been interpreted? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's in. You ready for it?
Yes.
This is a section 177.50. It was enacted in January 18th, 1958. It's a Title 26 regulation.
So
this is an ATF regulation.
So that was not part of either one, but it created this grandfathering principle.
Yeah, so what happened in both the National Firearms Act and the Gun Control Act is a delegated power to the Attorney General and then delegated power to the ATF. And then they create all these regulations.
Counsel, what I'm confused about, though, is why we're even looking at or why we're even concerned with anything that happened in pre-1968, because you're making an as-applied challenge as applied to your client. And it doesn't seem to me that, well, there is nothing in the record. In fact, the record is just the opposite. The Glock that your client possessed was not manufactured in 1968. He put it together himself somewhere around 2021. So I'm trying to figure out how we ever even get to what happened pre-1968. That's not before us.
That's right. So two responses. One, it's not an as-applied challenge when we're talking about whether this is a crime or not, right? 99% of my argument today is this is not a crime under Minnesota law to possess a privately manufactured, privately made firearm without a serial number. That part of the argument has nothing to do with 1968. Privately made firearms, homemade firearms, have never required serial numbers in the history of our country.
Well, I thought part of where you started, though, was that if we were to adopt the
You guys having fun yet?
position, you had sort of this parade of horribles, and I'm not minimizing that. Those are serious concerns. But one of those concerns was we would be criminalizing folks who had these kind of weapons from pre-1968. So that's what I'm getting at, that why are we concerned about that?
Look, the basic facts are pre-1968, you only had one reason to put a tax on a firearm, and it was never about privately owned firearms. It was about manufacturers and being taxed. I guess one of my other dudes is in the chat. But yeah, it was never about tracing firearms. The only crime you can solve with a firearm serial number is if it gets reported stolen. You can look, if you catch it in another crime, you can look at the serial number and go, oh shit, that gun was stolen from here. That's where it came from. back to the original purchaser, the 4473. That's the only thing the serial number does. Bullets don't have serial numbers. Casings don't have serial numbers. No matter how much they want to play this micro-stamping horseshit, it doesn't work. So you can recover 19 rounds from some poor bastard who just got shot up. None of them serialized. There's no real way to serialize each and every fucking round. So the serial number doesn't solve shit besides maybe a stolen gun. It doesn't stop a violent crime. The only thing a serial number can do is tell you, hey, yeah, this gun used in this violent crime was stole from here. This was the original purchaser. It's not solving the violent crime. That's solving a theft, a car break-in, a home break-in, something like that. It's not solving a violent crime. And like Warsaw already mentioned, you can take serial number off of a freaking firearm in no time with multiple objects. Rub it on the bumper. Use a rock that you pick up out of the street. Rub it on the curb. You can deface a serial number all day long like that. So serial numbers themselves ain't stopping shit. And yeah, there are some cases, Chess, because I've seen people do it when they were restoring firearms, where it's a stamped serial number, and there are certain acid etchings you can do, something like that, that will actually kind of define that serial number again, or at least get it readable. But even then, you can deface that serial number enough to where most police agencies are not going to spend the money to find that serial number. Now, the funny thing is, a lot of those guns with damaged serial numbers get reported as ghost guns, even though they were manufactured by an FFL or, sold by a distributor, all that. They get a serial number removed. They report them as ghost guns. I will bet my lily white ass that happens. And then they drive the number up of ghost guns, and they're so dangerous. I've got ghost guns sitting all over this joint. Ain't none of them walk through walls and shout somebody. Sorry. I've never had Ghostbusters have to come to my house to stop my gun from acting up. So, and yeah, you're right, Warsaw. Sometimes the chemical stuff doesn't raise that serial number back up. And I've seen people that were going to restore a firearm that had been heavily used, heavily rusted, that was actually manufactured after 68, and they couldn't get the serial number to raise, so they just had to cut the gun up and call it a day. Brooke, my sister, how are you doing? I saw you slip in here. Got to run to a meeting at 6:30. Well, have fun at your meeting, Brooke. Don't be like I normally am in the meetings where you just want to like bang your head into the table. Of course, you're a lot more patient person than I am. The conversation gets exhausting. Yes, it does. Which is pretty much, since I follow all this stuff and try to keep on top of it, why share it with you guys? Then we can have a bitch fest. Got to make monies. Oh, dude, this guy. Hold on. Who else is missing me? Buddy sent me a message. He said guns in his collection that he's 100% sure has bodies on them are all stamped property of U.S. government. So yes, surplus guns. Yes, definitely got bodies on them. But it's this whole argument. And John Lott, I think we watched it one night. It's been at least 2 months ago. When Delaware was trying to pass some of this stuff about ghost guns, and John Lott got on to a kind of a webinar, web meeting with a bunch of people from Delaware, and basically tried to set them straight. And it is amazing to me, these people just blew it off because, or some of the people did, because John Lott was correct in every damn thing that he said. But these people act like, no, if it's got a serial number on it, no, it can absolutely be traced. And that's a damn lie. It's not like it's blessed from Gandalf. It's a dwarven rune that can't be removed. It's ridiculous. So, I mean, these people literally, this dude that they're dealing with here, he was in a single vehicle accident. I read some other stuff. Didn't see that he was impaired or anything like that. He talks to the police. He actually admitted he had the gun in his car. Cops get the gun. Oh, no, this doesn't have a serial number on it. Wait a second. You don't have a permit. So they charge him. They're trying to put him in jail for 5 years just for the unserialized gun, plus whatever for not having the permit to have the gun on him, which was in his car. So, yeah, this whole case of fucking shit show, man. Got a gun from foreign country. Okay, hold on. What are you saying? If someone found a gun from foreign country and it has a serial number on it, technically legal to own. Yeah. Should be. I mean, unless it's a full auto. And then, of course, our restrictions on machine guns would come after your ass then. But, you know, like they're saying here, because again, until you get to 1968, the only reason that companies serialized a firearm, it wasn't a criminal situation. It was either them tracking parts manufactured, because some guns, especially hand fit guns, you couldn't take part, you know, whatever out of serial number 039 and go stick it in gun 0375 because it wouldn't work. Each part was manufactured specifically, so all the parts numbers had to match up. You know, once we increase manufacturing and skill and equipment and stuff like that, then I can move parts around, do all sorts of stuff. But it was always a way to make sure that all of these parts matched the gun, and then it was an inventory situation. And of course, the government tax. It was never about a person building their own firearm and having to serialize something. Since we're not manufacturers, we are manufacturing on our own. And it was never about, oh, we got to trace these crimes, because it's never stopped a single crime. But they're willing to throw this dude in jail for 5+ years because he had a polymer 80. He wasn't shooting at anybody. As far as I know, there were no drugs involved. I mean, you name it. From what it sounds like, this dude got into an accident and he had a gun in the car, and they want to throw him in prison.
Yeah, so if I could just make clear that this is a statutory interpretation argument regarding whether this is a crime.
Right.
Let's take the constitutional part completely out of this. Looking at the plain language, if this court says every firearm in Minnesota is required to have a serial number, then everyone who's in possession of a firearm that was manufactured before 1968 that does not have a serial number is committing a felony.
Okay.
And there's no distinction between a privately made firearm and a rifle made in 1966.
Okay.
And there's no way under the plain language to make that distinction. So if that would be the parade of horribles. And again, I want to make clear that this isn't just as applied to my client. This is whether 609.667 requires serial numbers.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
And as far as I think where we started the discussion was whether this was ambiguous or not. And part of that analysis, you have to have two reasonable interpretations. And our position is the state's interpretation is not reasonable. One, because of those consequences, and because there's no way that the legislature intended that in 1994. And that's what we're doing here, is we are trying to figure out what was the legislature's intent. I understand the quotation marks are the one thing that we're looking at to try to figure out what that means. But again, I really am strongly about it that the legislature wanted to include those two provisions within that quotation set and put an or between them to make sure that they're independent from each other. These are not two things that have anything to do with each other, and it doesn't make any sense if you take it out of the context of why they would want just those two to always be together and they only apply.
Let's do this real fast. because this is the statute that they're talking about. All right, so this is Minnesota code. And this is the what he's being charged through. So the title of this section of code is firearm removal or alteration of serial number. So whoever commits any of the following acts may be sentenced or imprisoned for not more than 5 years, or a payment or fine not more than $10,000, or both. So they can do both. They put you in jail for 5 years and charge you $10,000 for a crime with no victim at all, where no one was harmed. And it's, or both, for getting into it, obliterates, removes, changes, or alters the serial number or other identifying or other identification of a firearm. And that's where, when you get into this other identification of a firearm part, it's a little screwy. All right. Receives or possesses a firearm, the serial number or other identification of which has been obliterated, removed, changed, or altered, or, this is completely separate, receives or possesses a firearm that is not identified by a serial number. Notice there's no things for pre-68 guns or anything in here. But down here in this, in the bottom of this, it says, as used in this section, serial number or other identification means the serial number and or other information required under United States Code, Title 26, Section 5824 or 5842, for the identification of firearms. And see, if they're referencing federal code down here, well, guess what? Federal code has no requirements for a privately made firearm to be serialized. None whatsoever. It's been a few years ago. Some people I work with, one was pretty high up in a police organization, and he heard me talking to someone else. And I was telling the other guy about building a gun. I was like, yeah, you're building them on your own. You don't have to, do serial numbers or anything like that. You're not a federally licensed manufacturer. And this officer was like, well, I'd have to look into that. I said, it's really easy to find. You can go right on ATF's own website and find it. All that stuff with serialization and stuff after 1968 only applies to firearms manufactured by federally licensed dealers. No kidding, Chess. Apparently, all my firearms are defective. They've never went out and hurt another living soul on their own. I have the laziest rifles on the planet. I ain't running shotguns, because not only do I have to tote them through the woods, get them up in the tree with me if I'm deer hunting or even sitting on the ground, but then I have to aim them, pull the safety or pull the safety off depending on the design, and I have to squeeze the trigger and then make sure I'm holding on target to kill whatever I'm aiming at. So either I have the laziest guns on this planet, or guess what? It's probably comes down to the person who is operating the firearm that causes some sort of act. Just saying. I've never woken up in the middle of the night and had one of my guns trying to slip off to go shoot somebody. So it's just, most of these arguments are so ridiculous when you actually break them down to their end using facts and logic and reason. But then again, we're arguing with a bunch of people who don't like facts, logic, and reason. So there you go.
Where it was those two together in the statute. Then as far as ambiguity goes, if we get to that point, like I said, the state hasn't made any argument in their brief, and amicus hasn't either, that once we get to ambiguity, any sort of legislative intent supports their position. And I think that's very telling that the state of Minnesota right now is advocating for something that we all can agree that the legislature didn't intend. And those consequences, like I mentioned before, would result in possible Second Amendment challenges in the future. And this court should interpret it in a way that does not then create a Second Amendment issue.
Let's remember, it wasn't too long back that one of the federal courts basically said that obliterating or destroying a serial number on a firearm wasn't a crime. So that's another thing that come up in this. Now, in the lower court below this, the district court, excuse me, actually sided with the defendant, and Keith Ellison in his office decided to keep pushing these charges and pushing this case. That's why it's sitting in the Minnesota Supreme Court right now. So this is still working its way up. This could very well be another one of those cases that gets pushed way up in the federal courts. 50D man, what's up, brother man? How you doing? We having another good day, man. Listening to a bunch of arguments from people who absolutely hate freedom and liberty, and a bunch of judges who will probably just screw someone over because, let's face it, they don't like facts, freedom, liberty. So we'll see. We'll see how this lands in the Supreme Court.
I agree that this was not raised
Minnesota.
below, but the specific Second Amendment issue, but this court can interpret it in a way that would then result in that litigation.
Counsel, I wanted to go back to the plain language. So if it incorporates federal law, are you arguing that it also incorporates the ATF regulation?
I am, Your Honor.
Do you have authority for that? I don't know if we've ever done that before with a federal regulation. And the second part of my question is, assuming that I'm dubious about that, then what would we be incorporating from the actual statute?
Yeah. So I think, and one thing that was mentioned in the amicus brief was cases that this court has decided where they've referred to definitions in federal law.
Later, Sister Brooke.
And you don't go to regulation just from that definition. So if the Minnesota law says, look to federal definition of this word, I agree, we just look to that word, but that's not what the statute's doing. The statute is stating that what is required by federal law regarding serial numbers or other identification information. So in order to understand what's required by federal law, we need to go into the actual regulations that were written by the ATF and the Attorney General. Because just within the plain language of the federal statute, we don't get into any of that.
Yeah, you're
The plain language of the
right,
statute is talking about the Secretary of the Treasury. They have nothing to do with this anymore. That power has been delegated from the Treasury to the Attorney General and then the ATF.
But that last line, as I read it, it reads just like the legislature defines terms in a statute. As used in the section, quote, defined term means, like, it looks to me like they're defining a term. So what's the argument that it's more than a definition?
You're talking about in 609.667?
Yeah.
So if you go into the federal, where it says what is required by federal law.
But it's defining serial number and other identification, right? As used in the section, that term means. So that, I mean, so you were making the argument that this is something other than a definition, but it reads just like the legislature defines terms all the time in statutes. So your argument.
So it says at the end of this part of the code, as used in this section, serial number or other identification means the serial number and other information required under United States Code. And we'd have to go look at that. We ain't going all the way through that right now for the identification of firearms. So when you're talking about the identification of firearms, it could be the make of the firearm. It could be the look of the firearm. Does it have a compensator? Does not have a compensator? What color is it? You name it. If it's just all things that can be used to identify the firearm. So what happens if it doesn't have a comp and I put a comp on it? What happens if I Cerakote it? What happens if I completely re-blue it? This is what happens when you have idiots writing laws. But they want these things vague. Much like ATF regulations, and those aren't laws, but they want these things as vague as possible. And the reason they want them as vague as possible so they can go after anybody. And when we get to the state's presentation on this case, you guys will see that it's absolutely insane.
I mean, is the language that follows, is because it says required, that it takes it out of that and it means that we are encompassing a whole federal regulatory scheme?
That's right. Because there is no Minnesota regulatory scheme.
Well,
And
is
under
there-
subpart.
Is there a federal definition of serial number
There's not a federal, the
or,
ATF.
or other information?
Yeah, so, well,
I mean-
the ATF has very specific guidelines.
But is there a statutory definition? Are those defined in statute?
No, it is a regulatory scheme. The 27 CFR 478.92 is the ATF's definition of what is required under federal law for a serial number.
I'm just saying you couldn't look to the federal statute for that definition because it doesn't exist.
No, that's correct. And like I said before, do you have a?
So
And that is going back, that was part of my question. If we just look at the federal statute, what would we be incorporating?
Everything. I mean, there's the federal statute.
I thought you told us that the federal statute just banned every firearm, including 22 shotguns, except for those before 1968.
No,
These
that's
are
not correct.
judges.
The federal law does not require serial numbers for any privately made firearm, period.
Does it talk about privately made firearms?
The federal statute does not, but again,
See, it's a whole new deal.
so the
This is a
Minnesota.
whole new category of firearms that's come into being after the federal law.
That is not correct, Your Honor. When we're talking about privately made firearms, there's no difference between, so what you're talking about is the modern firearm that you can, parts of that you can buy online and you can put them together, and that's a huge problem. Our legislature needs to do something about that and and articulate clear regulations, just like the California legislature has done recently, the Connecticut legislature has done recently, to ban those types of firearms if that's what they want to do. But to take a statute like this that had nothing to do in 1994 with what we're talking about, when federal law did not require serial numbers on privately made firearms, whether it's a hobbyist making a firearm in their basement.
But is it silent on that issue, or does it say something specifically that you can point to draw that conclusion?
In the Minnesota statute,
And the federal?
every ATF regulation has said privately made firearms are not required to have serial numbers. So that's what everyone in America has relied on when they're buying these parts, when they're in their basement with their grandparents building these firearms. That is what they've looked at. And now this new interpretation of the law within the last couple of years has made them all felons. And there's no difference between pre-1968 rifles and a privately made firearm and a firearm kit that you buy online. And right now, what the legislature needs to do is distinguish between those, not make it a firearm to possess not make it a felony to possess a firearm before 1968 without a serial number, but specifically regulate these ghost guns that are a problem. And to take a 1994 statute and then try to encompass all of that into it is going to create huge problems. And again, if this court agrees with the state, there's no way to distinguish between those firearms made at home, or these kits that are coming in. And that's what the legislature needs to do.
So where in the federal regs are post-1968 ghost guns covered in the sort of privately made category?
So if you read the new rule, which just
Post 1968 ghost guns. All right, Judge, let me, because he's kind of asking about the federal statute right there. Let me explain this to you, Judge. It doesn't mention them because it has never been illegal to build your own firearms, and it's never been required to serialize your very own personal firearms that you build. Because at one point in time, there were some people in this country that had a little bit of goddamn sense. Maybe a little bit of mechanical knowledge that knew even if a firearm was serialized, it is extremely easy to remove said serial number. So all it was about was, hey, manufacturers, licensed manufacturers, you have to serialize your product. And that way, we are accounting for all of these products that you're putting out, and we can, basically account for your revenue, and then we can tax things. This didn't become a thing about tracing firearms until much later. And even then they understood anybody who wants to can remove a serial number. Again, it wasn't blessed by Gandalf. Jesus didn't come down, write serial number down, and have Gandalf put it on the gun, and have Gimli over here with some stone axe actually freaking put it onto the gun. No. It was put on there with mechanical means. It can be removed by mechanical means. And there are some, I know good and well, some receivers of some older shotguns and older rifles that have had to be destroyed because you couldn't get the serial number on them to come back to, whether it was acid etch, whatever, just couldn't get it to show. So a otherwise repairable gun had to be destroyed, usually done by, gunsmiths or FFLs, had to be destroyed because the serial number was just toast. Didn't save a single life. None at all whatsoever. But hey, let's throw someone in prison over it.
Piece and I were discussing, it articulates that numerous times that the ATF, that the Attorney General has never required serial numbers.
And when was that part of the reg promulgated? Was that at the same time as the pre-1968 regs?
So this was in 2022.
Okay, so we have some federal regs that predate 1994 passage, and your argument is that the legislature must have had those in mind when they were passing the law in 1994. And then we have other regs that are post 1994, and you think we should count those all as part of the incorporation here?
A couple things, and I just want to be clear. There is not a single reg that has ever said that a serial number is required on a privately made
Well, we have the statute, though. Like, I don't, on the plain face of the federal statute, you're not arguing that the statute gets at pre-1968 or ghost guns, are you?
No, what the statute is what is required under federal law. So the federal statute only requires serial numbers, which is required by federal law. I get that there's a lot of steps, and hey, I wish the legislature would have done something different in 1994. I don't think, well, if you listen to the legislative history about this, privately made firearms were mentioned, and they did not state, they could have clearly said, it is a felony to possess a privately made firearm, even though they're not required to have serial numbers. But they didn't do that. They didn't do anything like that. The statute was only for removal of serial numbers from firearms.
Thank you, counsel. You'll have time for rebuttal.
That's
Ms.
the only
Kelly.
thing the federal law touches on. That's the only thing the original Minnesota law touched on, was firearms that were manufactured with a serial number, and then those serial numbers later being defaced or destroyed. Didn't have anything to do with private citizens building their own firearms.
May it please the court, counsel, I'm Kelsey Kelly and I represent the state of Minnesota in this matter. Minnesota statute section 609.667 parent 3 is clear and unambiguous. It states that anyone who receives or possesses a firearm that is not identified by a serial number is guilty of a crime. It is not void for vagueness because anyone who reads that knows what is prohibited in the state of Minnesota. Minnesota law is more restrictive on this point than federal law. First,
Here's just one of those thoughts. Your average citizens, average everyday people, don't pay attention to the vast majority of laws that are on the books. Okay, we by nature understand it's not okay to rape, rob, murder, steal, crimes that actually have victims to them. We on a natural basis pretty much know those things are wrong. When they changed this law in 22, I think it was 22 when they threw in the last stuff about the any unserialized firearm. Unless you were plugged in and actually watching them pass this stuff, people had no idea about it. It's kind of like the pistol brace stuff. Even as much as we've talked about it, the vast majority of gun owners in the United States that owned braced firearms had no idea that this new regulation was coming down. The vast majority of people that build their own firearms didn't know anything was going on with the frame and receiver rule until they couldn't get frames and receivers for a little while. Or they had to go to one place to order a frame and one place to order a jig, DoD hardware. You know, they didn't realize this stuff was going on. So just saying, well, these people should have known. No, your laws, lady, should be just laws. And when just, I mean like justice, should be just. Not just, oh, we passed it and a normal person's got to just suck it up and fucking deal with it. All right, let me let this play. Let me go check on some kiddos real quick.
I'd like to talk about what a ghost gun is. There are two different ways in the modern era ghost guns come to be. First is through a 3D printer where you would print a receiver and a frame, and you would come up with the other parts and put it together. The proper way to go about getting a serial number would be to contact the ATF to go through a process of applying it. And then before you drill a hole in the receiver that allows the trigger and the firing pin to work, you apply the serial number that you got from the ATF. Before you drill that hole, it is not a firearm under Minnesota law because it is totally inoperable. The other way it works is you can get a package in the mail without that hole that I just described. So it comes in the mail, and the reason why it's lawful to receive them in the mail in Minnesota is because it doesn't have that hole and it's totally inoperable. With any drill, you can drill a hole in that package and create an operable firearm. That's when it becomes a firearm, because the triggering mechanism and the firing pin are all operable after that. Before you drill that hole and put it together, you need to, again, contact the ATF, get a proper serial number and put it on it, and then drill the hole. Then you have your lawful firearm. The statute and the process to get a serial number, getting the serial number, it might be confusing. If it's confusing to you, you should not possess one of those firearms. You should go to any retailer.
Okay. So getting back and listening to that. If it's confusing to you, you should not own one of those firearms. No, if your laws actually made sense, your average retard could understand them. But you guys are writing laws that make zero sense whatsoever. None. Well, criminals use this in crimes. They use all kinds of shit in crimes. You don't outlaw pants because the last guy who went out and killed people was wearing pants, or he drove his car to the site where he killed people. This thing about, oh, ghost guns and serial, it's mind-boggling. Because if he bought a gun from the crack house and had the serial number scraped off when he bought it, or he bought the gun and then scraped serial number off, you're in the same boat. You giant. Well, yeah, brother, that's most of them are too stupid to talk coherently on stuff like this. Warsaw, they outlaw all kinds of stuff in California because it's been known to cause cancer in the state of California.
And lawfully buy a firearm that has the serial number on it, and the manufacturer has already done that work for you. The statute is clear and unambiguous. It was even admitted by the district court in the district court's order that the statute clearly prohibited the possession of any firearm without a serial number. Minnesota statute does not mirror or incorporate federal law. In fact, Justice Procaccini, you brought up the fact that the part at the end of that statute, in quotations, serial number or other identification means, and then it goes on, and the only two places that exact quotation exists is in parent 1 and 2. That is significant. That is not in parent 3, which this case involves. It is true under federal law that privately made firearms or ghost guns are not illegal, but in Minnesota they are, until you get a serial number put on it properly. I'm ready to entertain the court's questions.
Counsel, describe for me what each of the subparts are designed, who each of the subparts are designed to punish. In other words, it seems to me there's something different going on in subparts 1 and 2 than there is in subpart 3, in the
Nothing
sense
right
that
now.
subparts 1 and 2 list a whole host of things that.
Bending
So
jig for
tell me what's designed to, what they're trying, what is it trying to get at?
Yes, Your Honor, in subpart 1, that is to criminalize the person who is actively damaging a serial number that's already on a firearm lawfully. So if you're going through and you are in some way changing, amending, or doing anything to change that serial number, you are guilty under that offense. Then under parent 3, if you receive, so if the person who,
No, you skipped number 2. What's happening in number 2?
oh yeah, sorry. In number 2, it's about receiving, sorry, Your Honor. So that's essentially receiving that firearm that has already been
Hold on, say I'm bought a little less.
manipulated. The serial number has been manipulated unlawfully in some way if you receive it. And then number 3 is much more broad. And it does include firearms before 1968. Minnesota has a different definition of firearm than federal law. Any firearm under Minnesota law without a valid serial number is criminalized under parent 3.
Is a gun that has, is a firearm that has the serial number obliterated or removed? Does that firearm have a serial number?
It has a serial number that's been manipulated, yes. So I would charge that under subpart 1 or subpart 2, depending on the facts of my case.
I'm talking about possession. So if it's obliterated, it still has a serial number.
That's right. And those are very different.
How is that?
So when those cases come in for charging, you can see on the firearm the way.
No, I'm sure, I get what obliterated means.
Yeah.
And removed.
Yes.
Removed would mean something more than obliterated, like it's gone.
Mhm.
And you're saying nonetheless, it still has a serial number.
I think although the serial number, you can't see it on there, it's not on there, that firearm once did have a serial number, so that's kind of the distinction I'm trying to make. I think parent 3 is talking about firearms that never had a serial number.
Well, that doesn't seem to, well, okay. But
So
why would you need obliterated or why would you need removed? Why would you need that part of 2 if your provision is correct, if your interpretation is correct? I mean, it seems to me if the serial number is removed, that gun doesn't have a serial number.
You're right, it no longer has a serial number that law enforcement can identify it by, but it did have one at one time, is what I'm trying to say. So the thing is, technically through ballistics, you can also, if a gun is used in multiple events and at one time we knew its serial number and we can match it ballistically, you would actually be.
Lady, in Minnesota, you do not have a record of the ballistics that match certain serial numbers. In Minnesota, you don't have that. And even if the ballistics matched a certain serial number, you can change out a barrel or something like that and completely change it. If a gun's used in multiple crimes, you can trace something by ballistics. You can see this bullet, pretty much it matches this bullet pulled out of these couple of bodies. You can match something like that. That has nothing to do with the actual serial number. She's conflating these two things, and she's an absolute idiot. Gabriel, what's up, brother? Even in, I think it was New York, and there might have been 1 or 2 other states that basically had ballistics of the gun and the serial number in a database together, and they still didn't solve crimes with it. Not violent crimes. It didn't work. It didn't solve anything. And these states spent millions and millions and millions of dollars to build that database and found out it didn't stop anything.
Able to say, well, this gun's serial number is XYZ. We know this because it was previously used in this crime when we know it had this serial number. So factually, the way they come into it to us is different.
And can I also ask you, you talked about our definition of firearm,
Mhm.
and in your opening statement, you said, well, it's inoperable even though you have all the parts.
Mhm.
But I thought we've held that even an inoperable gun that you have all the parts is still a firearm. So I don't get that argument.
So this court has held that. The way those
So
packages.
that would seem like if you're receiving the parts, you're committing a crime under Stone and a whole bunch of our cases.
So if you are receiving all of the parts, I agree with you. But the way these packages come, oftentimes you have to also buy other parts to put inside them from other firearms. So you actually have guns out there that are ghost guns that are made from different, like 3 or 4 types of guns where someone has
But
put
at some
them.
point, you're gonna have all those parts together.
Yep.
And even though the hole is not drilled, so you can can you get a serial number for a gun where you haven't gotten the parts yet?
No.
Okay, so then, once you receive those parts, while you're holding those parts,
Okay, so he's
before
tired.
the hole is drilled, you're committing a felony. Because in Minnesota, that's still a firearm because it's an inoperable.
If you have all of the parts,
Well,
yes.
not even necessarily.
So get that, and she's admitting the game here. If you have all the parts, most of the parts, to build the gun in your possession, you have a frame, barrel, slide, all unserialized, 80% frame, all that, you're already a felon. So when you go to apply for a serial number, you're having to admit you are in felony possession of these items and trying to get them serialized. If you have a gun that's pre-1968 and you decide, I want to keep this. This been in the family forever. I want to keep this gun, but I want to get it serialized so that it's legal to own in Minnesota. You are admitting you are committing a felony just by owning that. Much like the ATF with suppressor parts. So these people are insane.
All the parts is
Well,
held in stone.
Yes. However, obviously we have prosecutorial discretion and that actually also.
Well, see,
I have a question, Council, as it relates to, are you aware of any instances in Minnesota where an individual has been charged with possession of a gun pre-1968 that does not possess a serial number? Because as I understand your argument, you're saying that anybody who does own those or possess those is committing a crime, and I'm not so sure that Minnesotans know that or would agree with you.
I am not personally aware of any prosecutions involving guns made before 1968 or very old guns without serial numbers. You have to keep in mind, I only work in Anoka County. I've only worked there for 10 years. So, and I have not gone through the district courts to find out anything about that. However, and I think you're right that some people might not realize that. But yes, they are illegal. And there is a way to get a serial number even for those older guns.
But again, if you go to get a serial number for an older gun, you're admitting you are in felony possession of that item before you get the serial number. That's your ridiculous ass laws that you're defending, lady. You really, chick, not to make fun of you because you're a little heavy, but I'm pretty sure you've got some pretty good cookware in your home. You need to go home, find the biggest, heaviest skillet you have, and beat yourself in the fucking face with it until you knock some common sense into your head. What?
Someone wanted to get a serial number for an older gun. However, the reason why these prosecutions are increasing is because of ghost guns and what I was talking about with prosecutorial
Right, and
discretion.
I think that goes to your opponent's point, is that the ghost guns, this new category of guns, is concerning, but the legislature hasn't really done anything about that. Rather than sweeping in all of these pre-1968 guns, which I would agree with him, it's different.
You're on the legislature hasn't done anything because the statute already criminalizes them. They are firearms under
you're probably
Minnesota
right,
law,
brother.
and a statute clearly and unambiguously says that they are prohibited without a serial number. The legislature does not need to act because it is already illegal, and they are relying on the prosecutorial discretion of the executive branch to protect public safety, and that's what we're doing.
So
So here's another argument, kids. When you get into prosecutorial discretion, in other words, who the DA or whoever is going to charge for being in possession of these items, you are already screwed. It's like gray areas in laws. There shouldn't be a single gray area. You either did it or you didn't. That's all there is. Even if you ran all the way up to the line, threw the brakes on, and didn't do that thing, you didn't break the law. When you leave it up to prosecutors and DAs to see who they're going to charge and who they're not going to charge, that's how you end up with these idiots going, well, we're not charging trespassing anymore. We're not charging assaults anymore. We're not charging possession of whatever anymore. And it's because that's worked so well in the past. Yeah, selective prosecution. And we already know, and we've already seen where violent criminals are turned right back out on the street for very serious assaults, rapes, whatever. No, we're not charging them. We're going to slow roll this case. But you look at someone like Dexter Taylor up in New York, who built his own firearms, never hurt another single living soul, has always been a productive member of society, but you're going to throw him in jail for a little over a decade, I think is where it ended up, because he had the nerve to actually practice his fundamental rights. It really is just, it's mind-blowing to me. But hey, most of these lawyers come out of law school, complete absolute leftists, and then they just keep spinning the wheels on this system. We don't have justice systems anymore. We have legal systems. And in a legal system, they can put anybody in prison. Whole thing is Soviet Union. Show me the person, I'll show you the crime. That's where we're at. In Warsaw, man, it's just flat out being destroyed. I'll look up the constitutional protections for owning arms in Minnesota. I'll guarantee you the Minnesota Constitution doesn't give the state government the right to ban any sorts of guns or to require serial numbers or anything like that. Not their constitution. But hey, what are constitutional rights? You know, it's just pieces of paper. This dude, from what I can see, wasn't a violent criminal. What? Give me a second. Wasn't a violent criminal. Nothing I read earlier said he was a violent criminal. He just had an unserialized gun that he built on his own. So they couldn't even push the charges of, oh, you defaced a serial number. No, he built a polymer 80, a completely legal product. Wasn't hurting anybody with it. There's no victim there. Nothing. And these fucking cops who push this shit, I swear to God, they should be the ones going to prison. Because they know it's unconstitutional. But it's the law, and they will throw your ass in fucking jail for it. So, don't ask me to back no thin blue lines when police are doing shit like this. When they're going out and getting rapists and murderers and violent criminals, I will back them all day long. Because that's what they should be doing. But when they're going out and doing shit like this that is blatantly unconstitutional on multiple levels, no, don't ask me to back them. If you're throwing innocent people in jail who are no threat to society 1 minute, I don't give a shit whether you caught 4 rapists the other day. Don't. You're a piece of shit. Period. End of story. Some people may not like that, but hey, I am nothing else if not honest about what I got to say. So
I know that the constitutional question isn't explicitly before us, and we're not ruling on that. But the other side says that we should at least look to that the Second Amendment,
yeah,
as if we think this is an ambiguous statute, we should look to the Second Amendment to sort of constitutional avoidance, because we'd be creating a constitutional issue if we rule in the way that you're arguing. What's your response to that question?
Your Honor, I'd ask you to look at my brief to the Court of Appeals before it was clear or not whether we were litigating the Second Amendment. And in that, I made quite a few arguments that go all the way back to Virginia in the 1600s that required serial numbers on firearms for taxation issues. So clearly, even before we were a country, we were putting serial numbers on firearms for the purpose of taxation and regulation. Also, this statute does not prohibit any type of gun, no caliber of weapon, it doesn't prohibit whether it's a handgun, a long gun. You can still go and get any type of gun you want at a store, and you can even make one as long as you go to the ATF and get the serial number. So there is no class of weapon that is actually criminalized by this statute. And so that's also part of the Second Amendment analysis. And I did do a...
Let's look at this, because this was one of my arguments with Dexter's case. Is this didn't even have to get to the federal Second Amendment. Now, there are serious arguments to be made that state constitutions, state laws, can be less restrictive than the federal Constitution, but they can't be more restrictive. There are serious arguments to be made for that. In other words, if the federal government says something is legal, the state governments can't say that it is illegal, and pretty much vice versa. So let's see. Let's share this tab, because it's always fun looking at Giffords Law Center. So we go to state rights to bear arms in Minnesota. And it says the Minnesota Constitution does not contain a provision regarding a right to bear arms. The Minnesota Supreme Court held that even if such a right did exist, it's not an absolute. They're full of shit. In a case challenging a statute requiring a permit to carry a loaded handgun under a common law right to bear arms, the Minnesota Supreme Court, without deciding whether such a right existed, whether the scope of any common law or constitutional right to bear arms, we hold it is not absolute and does not guarantee individuals the right to carry a loaded weapon abroad at all circumstances. Now, understand this. When you look at constitutions, they are written in explicit terms. So much like California doesn't have protection of a right to bear arms. But also what it doesn't have is an explicit, the government gets to control these arms. So therefore, the government doesn't have the power to restrict them. And that's typically the way you would read the law in the first place. So whereas Minnesota apparently doesn't have a Second Amendment protection built into the Constitution, it doesn't have restrictions for arms written into its Constitution. So the government just simply doesn't have the power. You want a drumstick? You have a drumstick. Look, ice cream, man. It's a drumstick. So, because when you get into constitutions, whether it's state or whether it's federal, we're talking about explicit rights. So if the power is not granted to the government in the Constitution, that means that the people have that right. Yeah, brother. If you go by their rationale, yes. If you're in Minnesota, you could manufacture a machine gun. As long as that has a serial number, according to Minnesota. So this is one of the biggest arguments, like with the Bill of Rights and the constitutions themselves. They do not give the government powers. They tell the government what powers they have. Anything that's not explicitly mentioned is left to the people. So if the Constitution doesn't say the government can restrict arms, guess what? The government can't restrict arms, either state or federal. Sorry, kiss off. Yeah, Warsaw, pretty much. It's kind of a more broad end of it, like a 10,000-foot view, but yes. We'll see even if you go back, Matt, to 1600s, what we're talking about, according to Heller 2, Bruin, all that, is United States law. So even if it was something in the 1600s, 1500s, you name it, that was done under British law is not American or United States law. So it doesn't count. Not according to any logical person.
Brief version of that at the Court of Appeals, but I didn't do that here.
I know you did.
Is it just, as we explore this a little bit more under the Second Amendment, is there any distinction between a law that would criminalize the pre-1968 unserialized guns and the more recent ghost guns that people are putting together? Like, is the Second Amendment analysis with respect to those two categories of firearms?
No, because this is talking about the serial number. And so that's why it's not a Second Amendment issue, because we're not talking about a class of any type of weapon. And our country has a long history of requiring the serial number. So that's why it's not a Second Amendment issue. We're talking about the serial number, not the type of gun or firearm.
But again,
So counsel, if
again, this whole thing under the guise of public safety, you can remove a serial number off of any firearm. And when it is not a power explicitly delegated to the government, guess what the government gets to do? They get to fuck right on off. Just you wonder why our education system, it was so important back in the day that the leftists had to completely take it over. I submit to you Exhibit A. Wonder why that our kids have to put up with so much crap these days. Again, because the left completely took over the education system. Really and truly, since early 40s, maybe before then, you had some communists out there running the education systems. But it is certainly coming to a head these days. And people just don't know their rights. They don't know anything about constitutions, state or federal. They don't know anything about rights, how these documents were written, what they were supposed to do. None of that. What are you doing, Monster?
Can I have some toast, please?
Maybe in a minute. I don't know. I think we're pretty on this one already, War. Pretty much. And yeah, unserialized guns, privately made firearms, are a class of gun. They have been since before we were even a country. And I so wish this would just choke on the water she's trying to drink down. tar and feathers really needs to be a thing again.
Your opponent's correct that the phrase serial number incorporates the serial number, other information required under federal law for the identification of firearms. If the interpretation of the statute that he's urging us to adopt, if we agree
You
with
do,
that,
yeah.
then under the
He
federal
would
law,
be
as I
a
understand it, a
Olympian
privately made
mental
firearm or a ghost gun is
gymnastics.
not required to have a serial number on it. Is that correct?
Under federal law, at this time, privately made firearms are not required to have a serial number under federal law. You are right.
So I asked your opponent this question. I'll ask you. The crim jig on this question says serial number means the serial number or other information required under federal law for the identification of firearms. Obviously, that's not a conclusive final statement on the interpretation of a statute, but isn't that a little concerning in terms of what a widely respected reporter on criminal law is advising district courts that that phrase means? I mean, that seems like that should be something here. Maybe not. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Yeah, Your Honor, I think the jigs are something that district court judges often look to in order to prepare their jury instructions, but they are not the law. So you might look to them, but you have to always first go to the statute. So anyone in the district court's position, if something contradicts a statute and it's in the jig, it is the district court's job to fix the jig to match the law, not to match the law to the jig. So even though the jig says that, and someone may have believed that when they were writing that, and I agree, when I'm prosecuting, I use the jigs all the time because I do respect those people. But we actually have had several cases in Minnesota where this court has even said that the jigs are wrong, and the jigs are wrong.
Counsel, could you address Mr. Erickson's point that when we look at the language that's in quotation marks, serial number or other identification, that we have to give, as I understand his argument, we have to give weight to the disjunctive or. And so given that subpart 3 just has serial number, it's all part of the same thing. And so therefore the federal law
Absolutely,
applies.
Barton.
Why isn't that correct?
So, Your Honor, because that whole phrase, serial number or other identification, is in a quotation, I view that as applying to subpart 1 and 2, because if they wanted it to apply to subpart 3, they could have done serial number, end quote, or, quote, other identification.
Again, oh, like a buddy said, the mental gymnastics. Lady, the reason they put it in quotation marks at the end of the statute is so it would apply to all 3. That way they didn't have to put that at the end of all 3 sections. They put it in quotation marks that applied to all 3, reference federal law, like this is how this needs to be treated. It's like an instruction. These people need to go to fucking prison when they take somebody who is no danger to the public. At least in this case, he might have been whatever later. But in this case, no danger to the public, wasn't committing any other crimes, and they're going to throw him in prison and fine him at least $10,000 over this. We really do. What do you miss his name? No, you're right. It doesn't fit their talking points. Logic and reason doesn't fit their talking points. But I really would love to see a loser pays system to where district attorneys, states, whoever, federal, if they lose a case, they have to pay the legal fees and restitution and damages to the person that wins the case. Fair is fair, right? If you're going to charge them, I don't know, $10,000 for this bullshit law that they supposedly broke, if they win the case like they did in the lower court, you should be paying all of their legal fees. Any time lost at work, any money they lost, if they weren't out slinging dick, I don't care. You should be paying them back for every single cent. And that ought to come out of the budget for the state or the district. Period. So go ahead and charge that case. When you lose it, most of your budget's toast. And then you don't have the money to charge anything else. Maybe you'll prioritize going after violent people versus going after people who are no threat to society. Yeah, Chess, you already know how these trains roll. We're all going to have a headache. I got to go take some more Motrin now. I don't have it sitting on my desk like I normally do, but yeah.
Make it apply to all three subparts. So the way it's written, it also doesn't align with other ways this court has applied
Bradley, what's up,
statutory
brother?
interpretation to other cases. So we know that quotation, because it's in full, applies to the other places in the statute where it appears in full. They could have broken it up.
What do you say? And thank you. That's very helpful. There is something about this, though, when you look at the legislative history, you know, it just pairs up, you know, almost.
I don't know.
The federal
Pretty
law
damn
pairs
close.
up almost identically. And there's just, there's a feel to this that maybe we're putting form over substance in terms of what the legislature really intended to do. And that's always our sort of guiding star, is we need to follow and to attempt to make good on the legislative intent. What do you say to that?
Your Honor, we only get to legislative intent if it's an unambiguous statute. And it is so unambiguous and clear that we should not be looking into that. I agree with you. When this statute was created in 1994, we were not talking about 3D printers. We were not talking about these privately manufactured packages coming in the mail for people to assemble and do drilling. No one was talking about that. I agree. That's something that's come up in the last 5 to 10 years. However, because the language is unambiguous, we need to look at the clear language of that statute and first look to that to see what the legislative intent is before we actually start looking at legislative history.
If we decide that the statute's ambiguous, that both of your arguments are reasonable readings of them, how do we come out? What's your best argument that we should still come out your way? Or do you agree that once we get there, then your opponent is correct?
I do.
Even if we partially had to incorporate some of federal law, I think that we would still win, because I think it's possible under another reasonable interpretation that you would have to look to the federal statutes and regulations to determine how to obtain a serial number.
Yeah, it's about this thing can go almost longer. How many times we talk about the state always, or the federal government, state fed, always plays the game of hide and go fuck yourself and you can get fucked first? Because that's exactly what they're doing. Yeah, that could be a thing later. Yeah, maybe wear one of those in years.
But because Minnesota has decided to be more restrictive,
Well,
we would.
What about just the legislative history, which we could get to in ambiguity, where they said basically it seems to me, listening to that committee hearing, the author and the committee is understanding that to be, we have this federal law, the federal government can prosecute it, but we can't as a state. And so we want to give power to county attorneys to prosecute what's already.
Buddy of mine, he's messaging me on the phone, which we've talked about it before on streams. When you have someone propose a law that is just dead ass unconstitutional, they write the law, they submit the law to their Congress, whether it's state or federal, their asses ought to go to prison for that shit. If they pass the law and that law, say, has been in effect for, I don't know, a couple of years, and you have people that have been locked up and fined under that law, and then it goes to the courts and is found to be unconstitutional, the people who were involved in passing that law, the people who voted for it, people who helped write it, should be going to prison. And again, on top, he was talking about a fine, but not just paying a fine, they should be paying restitution to everybody that was locked up because of their goddamn unconstitutional law. And the majority of that ought to come out of their own finances until they are broke And then the state should have to pick that shit up, or the federal government should have to pick it up. But everybody who signed their little name to that bill, everybody who voted for that bill, should go to prison for the exact amount of time that all the people they sent to prison. So if your law was, I don't know, we're going to send people to jail for 2 years for being left-handed, and you sentenced 97 people to 2 years for being left-handed, and your bill was there for 10 years, those 97 people who were locked up for being left-handed, guess what? Add all of their sentences up, and all of you assholes get to go to fucking prison for that amount of time. We will leave your bones in the cell until they absolutely turn to dust, because you took those people and destroyed their lives for something that's absolutely unconstitutional. That's if we had a justice system, that's the way this would work. Oh, it would restrain the government. They wouldn't. Yes, that is the point. Criminals might get away. Okay. Let everybody be armed, and those criminals will be in the morgue. And then you'll never have to worry about them. I can't. Maybe it's just me. I like reality. I really do. I really just don't like the people who go around reality and make laws.
They criminalize under federal law. That seems to be, what do you do with that?
You know, I do think that the legislative history supports that. The problem in the way is the clear and unambiguous language of the statute.
Yeah,
Okay.
I get that, but if we get to ambiguity,
Mhm.
so you say, if we get to ambiguity, one of the things is there might be a reasonable reading that you have to incorporate one little part of federal law, which is the process for getting a serial
Yes.
number, but nothing else.
Right, because at the time, federal law also did not contemplate ghost guns. So it's not just Minnesota, nobody was contemplating the way modern ghost guns are working.
Is that the question?
Federal law always contemplated ghost guns, spooky things. Because people have always been allowed to privately manufacture firearms, what you now call ghost guns. And we have, at least me, I'm one of the ones who's kind of taken on that term to completely mock these dumbasses. But that's always been a thing. Federal law only addressed federally licensed manufacturers, which I believe is absolute horseshit. So, yeah, lady, this is where we get into two things can be true at the same time. One, this lady's a moron. And two, she has no sense of history at all.
No, or is the question whether, I agree, probably no one was contemplating this maybe at either time. But to be criminal, they had to actually make something criminal.
Mhm.
So it seems like you're proceeding from presumption that because they didn't know about it, they should be put in the criminalized bucket. Although it seems to me, although I still don't see what the statutory, aside from the regulations, I guess, but that guns before 1968 and privately made firearms, I mean, this Federal Register seems to say that's always been the law. We're not controlled, we're not criminalized. So if we're incorporating federal law, why does it matter that ghost guns weren't kind of in anybody's conception when it was also clear that privately made guns, firearms, were not criminalized in 1968?
So you're asking me why it matters that,
I mean, your argument seems to be, well, no one knew about ghost guns back then, so we should just we should read this to criminalize them. And I get your plain language stuff, but if we get to ambiguity and looking at what the federal government was doing, why would you think that it criminalized ghost guns when it pretty clearly, everybody agrees that it didn't? Privately manufactured guns.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand. So the criminal statutes actually the criminal statute is different than what we have in Minnesota law to begin with, because it actually goes through and talks about the different types of guns and the different parts of guns and what's criminal, what is a firearm. So already we are in a different ballpark from state law, because our state never incorporated that interpretation of what a firearm is.
Well,
So-
but I'm not sure, does that matter? I think what we're trying to understand is on which type of firearms does a serial number have to go on? We're trying to understand what serial number means. It's not defined anywhere. And so the only way we can understand what serial number means, if we are incorporating federal law, is to look at the federal statute, maybe the federal regulation. I guess we have to look there because the federal statute doesn't really talk about it, and determine which firearms required a serial number. If it didn't require a serial number under federal law, then it's not a serial number required under federal law. Why is that? Why? I don't understand how you can make something that federal law didn't require a serial number to be a serial number when the statute says, assuming that we're breaking up the quotations, a serial number required under the federal code.
Okay, so my answer to that is still similar. The definition of firearm in Minnesota is different than the definition under federal law, and that's why we are kind of diverged here, is because under federal law, the PMFs were never actually under the definitions in the federal code. So I'm saying if the statute is unambiguous in Minnesota, any firearm under Minnesota law would still need to.
Lady, privately made firearms under federal law have always been considered firearms. The definition of a firearm came down to put it in very basic terms, launching a projectile out of the barrel under the pressure of an explosive. I can't remember the exact way it's worded. It's been a day. That has always been the definition of a firearm in federal law. Always. So someone making a firearm at home was still making a firearm. They just weren't a federally licensed manufacturer. It's more proof these people, again, get back to the whole hide and go fuck yourself argument. They play, it's just like playing Monopoly with a 4-year-old. When you start winning, they just flip the board over. They start pulling more money out of the bank. It's absolutely just insane arguing with someone who is coming from a position from nothing but emotion, who completely denies facts, and you start talking facts. It's just maddening trying to get them to understand the facts. And very rarely will you get someone who comes from an emotional position, people like this, to actually understand a factual position. You are speaking two different languages. It's the reason dealing with anti-gun people on social media, there are certain times where I'm finally at the point where I'm just telling them, fuck off. I don't care about your opinion because your opinion is horseshit. Chess, dude, I feel that pain every time I get into this stuff. It's more proof.
Obtain a serial number under federal law. The ATF regulates putting out serial numbers, giving people serial numbers. So that's how you would go and get a serial number if you wanted one. What I'm saying is under.
Buddy of mine just posed or sent me something. He said, by this chick's logic, yeah, John Browning would have been a felon at 15. And yes, a lot of your very just awesome firearms designers would have been absolute felons if you used this lady's logic. So a lot of the innovations that have come about in firearms that people did in their own garage, that were building with their own money and spending their own money to develop parts and get stuff machined. Yeah, they're all felons, according to her. Warsaw, I do not know. I would say saddle soap off the rip, but if you're looking to preserve leather,
Minnesota, our definition of firearm has always been different than federal law. The reason why it's not criminal under the federal code is because they did not include that in their definitions, and Minnesota has always been broader than the federal law about what a firearm is.
Not in,
that is such an absolute lie, or you were just ignorant. And again, that can be two things true at one time. A firearm has always been a firearm in United States code, federal code. Always. Whether it was privately manufactured or manufactured by an FFL, if somebody went to Home Depot and built a slam fire shotgun out of 2 pieces of pipe, an end cap, and a nail, that is still a firearm under federal code. There have been plenty felon in possession cases that have come up over things like that. So how she can stand there and say, well, privately made firearms, or they're not a firearm under federal code. Again, she needs to really go find the heaviest pot, pan, whatever she has in her kitchen and beat herself in the face until she passes out or gets some common sense. Just Fluffy, what's up, my brother? Welcome to hell. Take a seat, strap in. At least you got here late, so it ain't gonna last that long. I did show off my set me kit at the start of the stream, though, so I've got about everything to build my set me. I just gotta get the jigs and stuff like that squared away. So, yeah, that'll be the next. That's the next one.
include what under their definitions?
In the federal code?
Yes.
The PMFs.
So, counsel, you're agreeing that if we get to ambiguity and if we decide we have to apply federal law, we don't just apply federal statute, but are you agreeing that it also incorporates the 2022 ATF regulation?
I don't think the statute would be incorporating those regulations because those can change. And that's totally a different administrative procedure that I do not specialize in. So no, I don't think we would go in as far as to say all of that is incorporated. Those are regulations. They're not even law, really. They're administrative law in a way, but they're not
But
legislation.
you're also saying under the statute, under the federal statute, under federal law, so under the federal statute, privately made firearms don't require a serial number.
That's right. They are not listed, and federal law has always had a different definition of firearm than Minnesota has. That's what I'm trying to explain.
Counsel, let me ask it a different way that'll help me understand it better. How do you win? Under what theory do you prevail if we accept Mr. Erickson's argument that the federal law is incorporated? How do you win? How do you still prevail? So we're in ambiguity land and we're looking at the federal statute. How does the state prevail? What's the argument? What's the syllabus point under
Yes.
which that you would say the state still prevails?
So, Your Honor, I would ask the court to apply Minnesota's definition of firearm under State v. Stone. And then if I were conceding that, you would then have to apply maybe federal law as it applies to how to get a serial number on a firearm.
Okay.
So another way of
Let's hit this real fast. So as far as I know, under federal law, not an ATF rule or some horse shit like that, the only way you get a serial number for a firearm is you have to be a federally licensed manufacturer. You have to produce a serial number for it, and then you have to have a company, whether you do it or whether a company does it, basically serialize that receiver or serialize that lower, that grip, you name it. A buddy of mine has been messaging me. Green, correct me if I'm wrong. It's got to be what, 3 thousandths deep. It can be stamped. It can be cut. It can be machined. But there are guidelines for serial numbers. But your average person who is not a manufacturer, there's no law federally that requires them to get a serial number on anything. Therefore, since it's not basically a law to get it, there's no real serious way for a private person to put a serial number on anything. Oh man, and there are people who will think this chick's making the best argument on the planet, and they are so absolutely ignorant and uninformed. It's mind blowing. It really is. I know I say it a lot on some of these streams, but it really is. You are correct. You have to have your own company name, logo, with city, state. Yeah, that was another thing. Yeah, you're right, Green. So to get a serial number on something, because when you build a firearm, it's not just throwing a number on the gun. You have to throw your company on it. You have to throw your city on it, and a lot of other information. So if you look at whatever gun, it's going to say the gun serial number, the company name, and then it's going to say the city where it was manufactured. All that stuff has to come in. If you are not a company, you don't get the serial number. So to just say, well, federal government, get serial numbers, no. It's not how that shit works.
Framing, it sounds like what you're saying is your opponent is asking us to incorporate federal law, not just as to serial number, but also as to the definition of firearm. And
Yes, he has to win. That's the only way he can win.
Okay,
Yes.
and does that go for, just to make sure I fully understand your argument, does that go for
I'm going to serialize all my guns. The first 6 numbers of any serial number I do is going to be FJB FATF. Actually, 7 serial numbers. And then just name them whatever I want after that. Yeah, now if you're form wanting a suppressor, and he is right about that. So if you're form wanting a suppressor, then you can get a serial number from the ATF. But other than that, unless you're a company manufacturer, you ain't doing it. And that's part of what my buddy was texting me, Warsaw. Yeah, if you form one a suppressor, or even if you built a SBR or SBS from the ground up from like 80% and built the gun, form wanting things, then yeah, you can get a form 1 number from them. But if you're building a regular rifle, regular shotgun, regular pistol, what you name it, no, there's no way for all of us to apply for a serial number or to get a serial number from the ATF. And then even if you got it, you have to pay a company to actually engrave, machine, laser cut that into the receiver. And it's got to have a lot more information than just that serial number. So none of this lady's arguments fit actual logic, reason, and law.
parts 1 and 2, that the definition of firearm and those subparts 2 is Minnesota law, and we shouldn't be looking to federal law on the definition of firearm at any point in the 609, 667. Because it does get a little funky, right? If you look at those 2 subparts, it feels to me like maybe we should be looking at federal firearms.
I think there is a good argument to be made that subparts 1 and 2 incorporate federal law to a much higher degree than subpart 3 because of that last section with the quotation that I already addressed. However, the state didn't proceed under that subpart. I think the court should narrowly look at what is in front of it today.
Counsel, for an ambiguity, what is the effect of the legislature's efforts to ban ghost guns that was introduced in the 2023 legislative session but wasn't enacted? Is that a clue in terms of what the legislature thinks these laws mean?
I definitely think it's a clue. There have been challenges all over the state to this statute, which I'm sure the court is aware of. The Minnesota County Attorneys Association has gotten together. We know there have been numerous challenges all across the state. And I do think the legislature is trying to make it easier for prosecutors so that we're not using our resources in places like this to fight it out, and we can go back and do our jobs and work with law enforcement and protect public safety. So I do think the legislature is trying to help us out with that.
Thank you.
Counsel, but I think I also heard you say before that the legislature doesn't need to change the law because of the way you're interpreting it.
Your Honor, I don't think it needs to.
But
I think,
sorry, you go ahead.
thank you, Your Honor. I don't think that the legislature needs to. And in fact, you know, the results of this case may also send a message to the legislature, and then it doesn't have to spend its time on doing that. However, the legislature is aware that prosecutors across the state are spending a lot of resources litigating this issue. And I do think that they're trying to make it more clear to defendants and defense attorneys so that we don't have to do that.
Thank you, counsel.
Thank you.
And then the guy for the defendant will get back up here in a minute. But there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. So basically, there are a lot of district attorneys and stuff in the state that are pressing cases like this, and we need to make a statement. Therefore, the defense attorneys know. And believe me, it is about the government making a statement. 100%. Ah, look who's checking in. What's up, Knight?
Hey, how's it going, Knight? The minute you sent me the link, family decided they were going to take me out to dinner. So, you know, it's just like, shit.
Well, at least you got dinner out of it.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
No. But I did get the set me kit that you sent me the link for, got the receiver, and got the barrel.
Now, are you gonna roll your own receiver, or are you just gonna go and buy one?
No, I'm gonna roll it.
Okay.
Receiver flat, baby.
Yep, I got one too.
So yeah, I gotta do some printing. So I've been working on trying to get my printer back in shape.
if you can't print, or I think we have to say it now. If you can't squirt the proper roller out, just let me know which one to print out, and I can print it out for you.
Yeah, I'll hit you up or hit Richard.
Because remember, I can get my K1 printers can get that out in a day, whereas it would take like a whole week on the Ender 3. Just ask Flying Rich.
Oh yeah, which you and Rich got the higher end printers. I'm running on the Ender back there.
Well, I bought one for like, you know, $400 because it was on. It was the Black Friday sale. And then I got one, you know, about a month and a half later, off of eBay for $100. It was broken, and all I had to fix was just use a laptop ribbing cable to get the touchscreen working again.
Oh shit, yeah, man.
And you know how much that cost me in parts? Like $12.
12? Okay, I was thinking
$12 to get a $400 printer working again. That I only paid $150 for. So, you know, it's just like, yeah.
All right, let's finish this up. Let's see what buddy's got to say here.
Oh wait, I got to say this properly.
Yeah.
I'm Gabriel. There we go. Because every time I'm in chat or I start a chat, you know, M. Gabriel is like, nice strike. And I'm like, M. Gabriel.
Gabriel's a solid dude, which everybody here is. Yeah.
Everybody's a solid dude, but Gabriel, he's super solid.
Yeah. That night or that Warsaw dude's kind of shady, you know. I'm not gonna say anything.
Thank you. And if I could just get back to what Justice Procaccini and I were talking about before. So if you look at,
and I gotta get with Knight one night, or Warsaw one night. He's been wanting to do a stream on some like paranormal stuff, and we got to do it one night. It's just lately, for the past little while, I just stream when I can. So it's been kind of hard for me to hook up a stream with him where we can do the stream that he wants to do all the paranormal stuff. But we are going to do that sometime, hopefully soon.
Right.
And that'll be a cool stream because it's completely outside of all the guns, normal horse shit that we talk about, and then go dive and do another pond for a little bit.
One of the gun guys I know, and I also do work for, you know, remotely. He's switched his YouTube channel over to talking about UAPs, or as they used to formerly be known as UFOs. So,
Oh yeah.
so I'm like, hey, talk about whatever the hell you want. Interest you, I don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, believe it or not, I've seen UFOs too.
That was normally when a woman was throwing stuff at you. It wasn't unidentified. It was a plate.
No, I was living in Phoenix at the time. Have you ever heard of the Phoenix Lights?
I have actually.
Yeah, I was living in Phoenix with my family, and we saw it. And my mom actually contacted her contacts at the Air Force Base, and yeah, they did not know what was going on.
So yeah, we still got to do that stream one night. Try to get that planned out. Hold on, it might be. We might do.
Bradley, we're not allowed to talk about those on YouTube anymore. They said so.
Well, I got a few of those laying around here. Like I said, I've never had to call Ghostbusters to come get them. So,
well, I ain't afraid of no ghost gun.
Shit. Warsaw, what's up, brother?
What's up?
Dude, you sound beat, man.
I'm beat and a little bit irritated from work.
Yeah. Well, this one ain't going to last much longer. We're going to finish this up, and then I got to get out here and go take care of fam and stuff like that. So let's listen to this out.
Aww.
How it references section 5842. And then we go to 5842 and you go to B. And that title is firearms without serial number. It says you shall identify the firearm with a serial number assigned by the secretary and any other information the secretary may by regulations prescribe. That is not a blanket requirement for serial numbers. That is a requirement to do what the secretary requires regarding serial numbers. And it's no longer the secretary, then it went to the attorney general and then the ATF. So it's not just a definition of serial number that we can just take out of the federal statute. You have to read that provision in the federal statute as giving authority to the secretary to prescribe what exactly the regulation is. It's a long way of getting to what the requirement is, but that's what the legislature did. And that applies to both A, B, and C.
Can you respond to whether we should consider Minnesota's definition of firearm versus the federal in interpreting the word serial number?
Yeah, so again, if you, 609.667 is using the section serial number or other identification. It doesn't say the definition of firearms from federal law. What we're talking about is serial number requirements. And as we know, the definition of firearm has changed in Minnesota after Stone. And if the legislature wants to use what this court did in Stone to write a new law, they should do that. But there's no way to parse out our definition. I mean, Minnesota's definition of firearm applies in the sense that if you have a firearm under Minnesota law, that's the same definition. But as far as serial number requirements, that has to be under the federal law.
Because it is trying to understand what type of firearms a serial number has to go on.
That's correct. And privately made firearms have never required serial numbers. And this idea that all of a sudden we have this new, that privately made firearms are ghost guns, as we're calling them, are new, that's just incorrect. The only definition of ghost gun is just a firearm without a serial number. So a firearm made at home in 1800 is technically a ghost gun. If the legislature wants to ban kits that are sent to people and they can put together, they can try to do that. But when we're talking about privately made firearms and ghost guns right now, we are talking about the exact same thing.
We're just kind of finishing.
So what's your best argument against this basic notion that the way we should read this statute is to look to the Minnesota definition of firearm and then to federal law only with regard to process and procedure? So we say all firearms in Minnesota need the serial number, and we only look to federal law to determine the process and procedure for getting a serial number. And federal law and regulations provide a process for obtaining a serial number. There's some internal logic to that argument.
I think that would be an absolute mess, because federal law, nowhere in federal law does it say that an individual has to bring their firearm to get a serial number.
But it allows anybody. Am I right that it allows anybody to go get a serial number?
If I have a pre-1968 shotgun and I bring it to a gunsmith or a licensed dealer, I can request that
hold on. So let me pull this real quick. I just looked at it. So this is saying Minnesota law defines a firearm as a device that expels a projectile through the combustion, explosion, gas, or compressed air, and is designed to be used as a weapon. Definitions used in many or in Minnesota statutes. So yeah, Minnesota's definition of a firearm is a lot more expansive than a federal definition. But hate to break it to him, still, there's nothing in the Minnesota Constitution that says that the government gets to regulate firearms.
They put it on that. But this idea that there would be any requirement and it would be clear to Minnesotans who have these guns.
Well,
that they
just
would
to be
need the
clear, I mean,
guns.
I heard Ms. Kelly say that you can go to ATF and request a serial number for a firearm that doesn't have one. Is that incorrect?
I don't see that in Minnesota law.
Under federal law, because again, I think the argument we just heard was that look to the definition of firearm in Minnesota, it's broader than federal law, but then follow the federal requirements for getting a serial number. And so, is there some obstacle to getting a serial number for a firearm if a Minnesotan wants to get one?
So you're saying
You wait war?
There is an obstacle to pay an FFL to engrave it, and not every FFL has the capability to actually engrave or laser engrave and etch into a frame of an 80% frame.
No, that's right.
Yeah, no, most FFLs are not actually engraving or machining or anything else.
Yeah.
Serial numbers.
And so at that point, you might as well just get the chop saw out and just be done with it. Get rid of the frame then.
Well, according to them, as long as you have the frame, you're a felon. And
No,
if you're
but
a felon and you destroy the frame, then you're
saying.
destroying evidence.
Yeah.
So it's freaking, yeah, it's mind blowing.
Yeah. I'm just saying, if for people that don't know what they're getting into, they're got themselves in a predicament. They don't know what the fuck to do then.
Oh, and you guys already know, because all of us are into firearms. We watch stuff like this, but your vast majority of gun owners don't spend time doing stuff like this. I would hate to, well, actually, I kind of love to see, because I know some people who run FFLs who have SBRs and SBSs come in where the person who owned it had no idea about barrel lengths or anything. And there's some work they won't touch. They was like, nope, we can't touch that. When the customer asks, they tell them, well, because these things, so that's all you go do with that what you will, but we're not touching it. And a customer will say, well, I bought all these parts legally. And no, yeah, you bought all those parts legally. However, when you put all of those legal parts together, you made an illegal object. So we can't touch it. Because most people aren't informed about these laws. We have so many criminal laws on the books right now. Nobody, including your lawyers, know all of them.
And for damn sure most of those laws are unjust.
Absolutely. If there's, I'm tell you right now, if there's no clear victim, I didn't rape somebody, I didn't murder somebody, I didn't rob somebody, I just had this thing and you criminalized it, it's an unjust law.
So is alcohol, weed. I mean, just ownership of a possessed, contraband item right there. That's enough to make you go to jail.
The original act. Anybody sent me all gun laws are illegal? Yes, they are.
All gun
The
laws are
original
illegal.
act that outlawed opium was absolutely unconstitutional. And a little bit of history here, kids. The original law, I'd have to go back and look at the whole thing, but the original law that basically made opium possession illegal is what the 1934 NFA was based off of.
Mm-hmm.
They talked about it in the hearings. So another little handy dandy piece of history.
Sure, an individual could go to the ATF and say, I want a serial number for my firearm. But if there's no requirement to do that in the law, and it's not anywhere in federal or Minnesota law that the person needs to do that, that's where the problem is. Someone gets charged.
Well, I think the state is arguing that subpart 3 creates that requirement.
I don't know where it says that, or where it says you need to go to the ATF to go get a serial
Well,
number. in
it
subpart
says it's
3.
a crime to possess or receive a firearm that is not identified by a serial number. So that means you got to have a serial number.
Right. So again, it's what's required by federal law. Those firearms aren't required to have it by federal law. And second, what is, when the legislature wrote this in 1994, was there any grace period? If you get caught on the way to the ATF, are you committing a felony under Minnesota law? If you have it if you bring it into the gun dealer, are they going to report you for having it? I mean,
I know
there's
you're
none of
probably,
this.
you might roll your eyes at this, but that at some level, we do have to rely on prosecutorial discretion. I mean, I think there's certain things that are just, very unlikely to be charged. That's not this case where, the defendant's in a rollover accident and there's the Glock 9, in the car that has no serial number.
That's right. And I see a huge problem, as the state even articulated. We're not going to prosecute rifles manufactured pre-1968 that don't have serial numbers. We're just going to prosecute these handguns. There's a pretty big discrepancy there between different parts of the state of Minnesota, and who that would apply to.
We should not leave it up to the prosecutors.
As much as I respect our prosecutors, I think that is a very clear problem, especially if they articulate that this morning, that, we're not going to do it for certain guns, but we're going to do it for others. I have clients with all of these guns.
Because, for example, if my mom has a shotgun pre-1968.
They're going to go after her.
You're going to go after her. Or if it's used my brother takes it, he gets angry at somebody, shoots them, they could go back and say, well, you didn't have it identified, et cetera. I mean, I can see the parade of horribles that you're thinking about, because I'm thinking about Northwest Minnesota, where I'm from.
That's right. And anecdotally, I live in Minneapolis, but I've been getting calls and emails from people all across the state asking me after the Court of Appeals opinion, what do I do? What am I supposed to do with this? Am I supposed to deface this rifle that my grandpa gave me and write it with a Sharpie, a number? What am I supposed to do? Because there's no articulation in the statute as to what these people are supposed to do. And then at that point, even if you do put a serial number, again, what's the registration process? Where is this recorded? The whole point of serial numbers is in commerce, right? A manufacturer makes a firearm, puts a serial number on it. It goes to a person. The person then brings it into a gunsmith to get it fixed. They write it down. It goes through that chain. If an individual just scratches one in, what does that mean? What happens if that turns up at a crime or is stolen? How are they going to trace it? It doesn't solve any of the issues that are behind serial numbers, because there's no explanation, where there is a clear explanation in the federal law as to recording and how this all works.
If we accept your argument that a criminal statute doesn't show how a person can bring themselves into compliance with it, I mean, that would apply to many, many statutes in Minnesota, and I don't think we really have precedent that way.
So we're getting to the vagueness issue. Step 6. Yeah, let's talk about it. I agree, but as we've discussed, and I think we all agree this morning, is this is a unique statute.
Yeah, probably,
just requiring action. So think about it in 1994 when it was written. We know that they were pre-1968 firearms without serial numbers. So it was telling people, you need to comply with this law, but there's nothing there for people to comply with. The only alternative would be, you need to turn in your firearms. And as we've discussed, that would create huge Second Amendment issues. So I agree that is compliance with the law, but it's asking what somebody how to comply with the law. It's not just ignorance of the law. It's saying, I didn't know this existed. It's saying, I know it exists, but I don't know what to do about it. Right?
But is there any precedent? Can you cite us to any case that says that simply because the statute doesn't specify how one complies, that it's vague under our constitutional framework?
I can't. And it's not because this court shouldn't rule that way. It's just that there hasn't been a statute like this that.
How about any statute that is vague is unconstitutional? It's
How
not
about
vague
a-
to say you can't go out and wrongfully deprive someone else of life, liberty, or property. That's not vague.
How about also the fact that it's contradicting itself with the main law you have already on the books?
Yeah. This is again, this is another case of, privately made firearms were legal forever in Minnesota, and then they change their laws and make them illegal, which turns a bunch of people into felons overnight.
No, not felons.
I mean,
The way the states are, I mean, again, if you go to the legislative intent and we're talking about what is actually trying to do, it makes very clear sense of what's going on in the statute and what people need to do. If you take their interpretation, it creates this issue, right? Because like I said, in 1994, when the statute was written, there were these people had privately made firearms, people had firearms pre-1968, and there's no explanation as what to do. So I agree that there is not a single
Do
case.
people have any obligation whatsoever to investigate on how one might comply?
Okay, so if we take the state's interpretation of the statute and someone says,
That's
I have
dumb
a 1967
fucking question.
rifle, how do I comply? Well, where would you look if the federal law doesn't apply? There's not anything in Minnesota law that would say you need to go to a gunsmith, you need to go to a licensed dealer, or
FFL.
the questions I've been getting is, should I be doing this myself? And again, if someone writes their initials and a number and then gives it to somebody else and then it's passed down the chain, how are we going to know what that is?
I guess I'm asking a slightly different question, which is, does a person have an obligation? Maybe there's nothing in the statute, but do you have any just independent obligation to call your local law enforcement and say,
Pause.
or something?
Pause.
Do you think people have an obligation?
I'm
to do
working
that?
on it.
If the legislature,
Why the fuck would you ever call your local law enforcement? They're not there to help and solve your problems. That's an attorney question, you dumb fucking egg.
Hey, Mr. Law Enforcement, I have this thing that doesn't have a serial number on it, so let me admit that I'm completely a felon at this point. So here's my address. Come pick me up, throw me in prison.
You're a
Said-
judge. You're supposed to know this shit.
Right?
Wait, dude, how many by now? How many oral arguments have we been through and listened to these judges, and they are nothing but just tools for the state.
It's also entrapment, Coop. I know this better than anybody.
It's again, we get back to frames and receivers, pistol braces, being in the business, and all this horse shit. As far as federal stuff, of course, it's been a lot of is all coming through state courts, but yeah, you are taking people that aren't harming another living soul. You are turning them into felons.
These are peaceful citizens.
Yes. Now, the argument comes, well, what's someone making these ghost guns and they're selling them to criminals?
No, not ghost guns.
If you can prove that they were manufacturing firearms without a license and then selling them to known felons, and then those felons use those in crimes, you already have 3 federal laws at least that would put them in jail for 50 years.
No.
That testimony from Josh Shapiro that time up in freaking where's Shapiro at?
I don't care.
Pennsylvania. Yeah, his testimony in front of Congress that time. He absolutely perjured himself. Because if they didn't go, or well, he did 2 things. He actually perjured himself, or he proved that his law enforcement is absolutely inept. Because they said that the people were buying these gun kits at a gun show. They were walking to the table next door. The person next door, who was a known felon, prohibited possessor, was finishing out the frames, making functioning firearms, and handing them back to the people. There's like 5 felonies involved in that whole situation.
Yeah. I can believe they're inept. I can believe that.
Well, yeah, you got me there. We are talking about governments.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, you got me.
passed a law banning something and didn't explain. It's just a mess. And I suppose you could, but I don't even know what law enforcement would say at that point, because they wouldn't have anything to look at either, because there's nothing that's prescribed in the statute. See, my time's
Yeah, you're
up.
right.
Or do I said, go.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just quick, it's a similar question to the chiefs. Do you have any authority on the grace period argument that you're making? Is there any authority that says that failure to provide for a grace period makes something void for vagueness or otherwise renders a statute ineffective?
No, but if I could just respond generally to that, I think the grace period argument also supports our argument that this is not a crime, right? Because in 1994, if legislature truly wanted to create this, require this, they would have said, as the California legislature and the Connecticut legislature have recently done, we're going to give you until January 1st of 1996 to put these serial numbers on. Or if you're coming from out of state, we're going to give you 60 days to comply with this law, because that's fair and that's how due process works. So.
Wouldn't have
Thank
quite
you,
went
Counsel.
there with that
Thank you
argument,
to
but
both
okay.
of the attorneys here today for the help that you've provided to the court. We'll take the matter under advisement, and we'll issue our opinion in due course.
So this will be interesting to watch, to see how this case actually falls. For the most part, and you guys kind of give me your feelings on it since we watch it. For the most part, I didn't see any judges in that court that, like, when you compare them to the 7th Circuit or the 9th Circuit, that were just so anti-gun no matter what happened. We're like, nope, person's fucked. We're siding with the state. I didn't catch that from most of these judges. Some a little on the line, but not as out and in your face, at least, as 9th Circuit, 7th Circuit. So it's definitely going to be an interesting case to watch. And this will fall right in line with Vanderstock. You guys ain't going to talk no more.
I'm
get
listening.
out in a second, but
I'm listening.
I think I had a 4-year-old just explode in the bathroom.
Uh-oh. I hate it when that happens.
No, I
Yeah,
think,
that's one of the reasons it took me so long to get back this last time, because I think he exorcised a demon.
Well,
and that demon hit mainly the toilet.
He's definitely related to you then.
Well, you kiss my ass.
Love you too.
No, but no, this whole case here alone, I think it's just going to help out more with the Bruin decision, especially with the federal Supreme Court.
Man, it can, but you know, it kills me talking about the Bruin decision a lot of times, because what we've seen a lot is these lower courts just basically, even though the Bruin decision came down, the Bruin decision was very clear. It cleared up a lot of vague bullshit from Heller 1, Heller 2, McDonald before that. It cleared up a lot of that. You still see the lower courts basically saying, we're going to do what we want to do.
And right there is a red flag.
One of the poster children for that is Easterbrook in the 7th Circuit. I mean,
fucking rhino.
That dude needs a house to fall on him, like the Wicked Witch, and just roll his damn socks up or something.
Which dude?
Easterbrook and Judge Wood up in
Circuit.
Chicago.
Actually, I was going to say, you know, Sotomayor, Ketanji Brown fits the description of the Wicked Witch of the West.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah, I hadn't even touched the federal people yet.
Yeah,
I was talking about I hadn't talked about Scottish yet. I was talking about the lower federal courts.
Right, but you want Wicked Witch of the West. You know, it's a tie between Sotomayor and, you know, Brown.
Oh no, there are a couple on the 7th, the 9th, the who else have we listened to? I know we've listened to
the 4th.
5th Circuit's good, 4th Circuit sucks, 7th Circuit sucks, 9th Circuit sucks. Yeah, we listened to a few. There are some wicked witches out there. And by the way, kids, the Biden administration has put roughly 200 and some change judges on the federal courts that are all diversity hires that will not respect the Constitution. So just know this is unless the Supreme Court makes a stand, this shit don't get no funner. So, but anyway, guys, I'll tell you what, let me get out of here. Let me go clean up an explosion and actually start doing something as far as dinner and kiddos and all that.
Right, right.
Because we have had way too much fun already.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Better than
know.
Disneyland with the trannies. Hold on, did I say that out loud? Yeah, I did.
I'll be honest. I've been a little quiet because I've been working on my D-Day video in the background.
Oh, nice.
Because I took all my I took an old surplus army wool blanket, and I put that out on the back table on my back porch, and I put all of the World War II-esque or style guns I have, and put them on there. And I didn't put the Carcano in there because the Carcano looks like dog poo, so I'm not gonna put that in there. But I got all the other good stuff.
There's who is it? Artak and Daughters, I think, is one that's done. He's working up to the days of D-Day. Has done some really good videos. But yeah, man, it's some cool stuff, man. I can't wait to see some of the videos you guys put out, because I don't think I'm doing anything really on D-Day.
I mean, all I'm doing is just showing off my guns. That's all I'm doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to go and shoot them and record video of it, but I could not find my tripod. 1 and 2, I found out that I need to order more ammo, so I went and did that this afternoon.
Yeah, no kidding. And
by the way, if you guys don't have ammo right now, go order some.
Yeah, that's one of my things, which I ordered parts and some other stuff, so it kind of cut down on my ammo order. But
yeah,
you know,
Yeah.
that sent me. I've been wanting to build one forever. You sent me the link.
And you've got access to a TIG.
Yeah.
I don't have access to a TIG. I probably should go out and buy one.
Yeah, dude, you can take even some of the small, just stick welders from Harbor Freight. Believe it or not, you can TIG off of them. It's a simple air-cooled setup with a power lug. You can TIG off. Is it going to be perfect? No. Is it going to be like foot pedal control and all that? No. Can you do it? Yes.
The problem is with the way these receivers are built, you want to use a TIG welder that has gas.
Oh, dude, every TIG welder has gas, Night Strike.
I know.
Argon.
That's why they call it gas tungsten arc welding. That's why they call it TIG in the first place, was tungsten inert gas.
And that gas is normally argon, right?
Normally for TIG, yeah, it's going to be 100% argon.
Okay. What is it? What is it for MIG? Because I just got a flux core MIG.
Metal inert gas.
MIG can be a couple of different mixes. You can run MIG with straight CO2 in some cases. It depends on the wire that you're running. You can run flux core with straight CO2.
Right.
Now, it depends again on the flux core itself. Some flux core wires are meant to run gasless, and even if you're running a shielding gas with it, it doesn't change the characteristics of the wire.
Well, the wire I've got is shielded wire, so I don't need to use gas.
Yeah, which means if you add a gas to it, it's going to run the same. It's not going to change anything.
It's not going to. You're not going to notice the difference.
No, you're not going to notice the difference. So what you need, because flux core wires are what you call inner shield that aren't required to have a gas, and running a gas with them isn't going to change anything. And some flux core wires are dual shield gases. So they get a certain amount of shielding from the wire itself, and you put a shielding gas with it. And that's where you see a massive change in the way that wire runs.
Right.
Because flux core is its own animal. Now, if you're running dual shield wire where you're running a gas with flux core, it can run beautiful. It can be flat out sexy. There's no lie about it. So if you wanted to run flux core with gas, look into a dual shield wire. It's going to be a 71T1, 71T2, something like that. Can't remember the designation offhand. I run so much of it. But
I think I'm just going to have Mark help me.
Yeah, Mark. Not everybody has Mark in their back pocket.
Yes, I do, and you're jealous.
You just like,
Just admit
I
it.
am. You like name dropping. And do you know what I would do to spend like a month in that dude's back pocket just learning from him? I will be the biggest tool monkey on the planet.
He has to like you enough to let you in his shop first. So,
can he deal with complete smartasses that smoke a lot?
yeah, he does that too.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
That's you just described Mark.
Yeah, pretty much. But anyway, guys, let me get out of here. Night Strike, tell them where they can find you.
You guys can find me on YouTube. Just go to youtube.com/@nightstrike, NIGHTSTRYKE. Or if you're gonna do it in the YouTube search, look for Night Strike 1, and you'll find me.
Warsaw, what do you got to say for the end of this, brother?
You'll see me here with Coop, C&T Design Arms, and yeah, you can find me on YouTube. But also, you'll see me every once in a while in the mornings. I'm Bishop on Air, so we're trying to destroy the Illinois assault weapons case here.
Good luck with that.
That's another
Nice
one,
strike.
man.
Hey, nice strike here. You want an update? We destroyed the Pritzker's ethics law, which was going to alter our elections. So yeah, there's that major victory. Just one today.
That is a major victory, especially against Pritzker. Ugh.
That's a huge victory.
It was just ruled unconstitutional today, dude.
Getting rid of his election stuff is massive. But for you guys that don't know, man, look up Bishop on Air. He's normally on in the mornings, anywhere from Night Strike, about 8:45 to 9 and some change is when it'll come on, depending on what his morning's looking like.
Way too early for me.
And it's all the stuff that he's dealing with right now and stuff he's talking about, even though people think, oh, it's just Illinois. No, it has national repercussions. So
everywhere across our states.
So the stuff that Bishop's talking about typically in the mornings, which I try to catch him when I'm heading into work. This morning I had to catch up on him later. But all the stuff he's talking about again is a national deal. That's why we're waiting for so many cases from Illinois to see whether the Supreme Court picks them up.
You got 6 right now in the federal Supreme Court, literally on their desk.
Because that is a massive fight. And if these cases in Illinois get crushed, it crushes most other states, period.
New York be one of them that's been on this for a decade.
Now, will they come back with more BS? We know these leftists, man. They never give up. So we got, especially depending on how this election works out, we got some major stuff going on, guys. So
Trump being convicted for one wrongfully.
Dude,
don't even joke about that or laugh. That's not funny.
No, I'm not laughing.
That's funny as CRS being in prison.
That's right. I'm laughing because it's disturbing at the same time. All right, that's why.
I mean, sometimes you got to laugh, so you don't cry. But when you take stuff that would be basic misdemeanors that would be fined, and you somehow work them up to felonies to imprison somebody, I'm going to go in just a second, but in a case where they can't even define the crimes, and where a jury doesn't have to agree, they can just say, well, I think he did this and I think he did that. 4 people think he did that. Oh, well, he's guilty.
He's guilty.
Can you imagine a murder trial that goes that way?
And the guy was innocent?
It just...
I know.
Dude,
I know.
It's serious banana democracy. It's not even a banana republic. It is banana democracy.
I wouldn't even call it democracy.
No, this is full on democracy. It's mob rule, which is what democracy actually is, where you have more useful idiots than informed people, and they're the ones who are deciding the direction according to whatever updates they get from their masters. This is straight out democracy at work.
And Coop, remember I was telling you about Michael Francis, the YouTuber and former mobster? He's not a full Trump supporter, but he said if this happens to Trump, it could happen to anyone.
Yeah.
Again.
And he was right. This is what we're dealing with.
Dude, think about it. So Trump, and I gotta go, but Trump has literally millions, if not billions of dollars to fight the state and the federal government. The vast majority of Americans don't have it. You'll be lucky if we could come up with 10 grand to fight a case. And that's getting loans and borrowing money from family. Be lucky if we can get 10 grand to fight a case. And the federal government, if they're running out of money, they just fire a printer back up and start printing $100 bills.
Yep.
So yeah, if they, and I'm not the biggest Trump fan on the planet, but yes, if they can do this to Trump,
they can do it to anyone.
They can do it to anyone.
How much chance does your average dude making 20 an hour? How much chance does he have?
Very little.
Not much.
Like, yeah, none.
He's
whatsoever.
got 20 to 80% chance less of actually succeeding.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is a crazy world we're living, guys, and it's going to get more crazy. So, let me get out of here. Do the same thing as always. You perks be cool. Keep that thing on you at all times, even it is a spooky ghost gun, because that is my everyday carry. And you guys take them easy, man. We'll catch you guys on some streams after a while. I love you guys. Be careful. Z, my brother, good to see you again as always. And yeah, you're right. CO2, flux core, yes. But you guys take them easy, man. We're getting out of here. I got to go again. Take care of an explosion. Who knew a 4-year-old could shit that much? All right, I'm going to leave you with that thought. Bye. Dad advice.
Bye, Felicia.